right? Okay. Take it away.
Members of the boards, Joe Curlier, Risk Management Director, bring to you this evening the Healthy and Safe Schools Plan. This is a product of the Oregon Department of Education, Rule Division 22 rules. It was recently updated to reflect a new rule effective January 1 from the Oregon Health Authority that defines how water taps in schools will be tested on an ongoing basis, starting July 1st of 2020. The plan also requires board adoption by July 1st, forwarded to the DE by July 15th. There's an annual update required. So any changes that are made to the schedule of testing, contacts that are listed.
Go ahead.
I gotta see what that
It's food.
So ODE provided a draft plan to all school districts in Oregon. Draft plan in the board materials models that draft plan of ODE. It was submitted to ODE on April 1st as required. They provided a little bit of feedback, caught the typos. Wanted us to clarify if we own any buildings that are occupied by charter schools. Found the link that didn't work, a few things like that. So we did the review by ODE. The significance of the Health and Safe Schools Plan is it's the first time that ongoing testing for lead and water is required in Oregon. After all we've been through, it's actually never been technically required. And it's required every 6 years for a district the size of PPS. The rule directs us to test a portion of all taps each year. In conversations with the ODE and stakeholders, they refer to it as 1/6 for the 6 years. And they also want to stay coordinated with the school districts because there's $1 million a year out of the school facilities fund, which will reimburse school districts for the cost of testing. And so they want to make sure they even that out year over year. Can reimburse the schools for testing. There is no reimbursement for mitigation. We have bond funds that are currently mitigating problem taps.
Just another unfunded mandate brought to you by Salem.
There you go. So the request this evening is to review the draft, and I would like to bring you a cleaned up version. It doesn't say draft, has a few of the typos fixed for adoption next week, and then I'll submit it to ODE.
So is it ODE or OHA?
ODE.
They're responsible for administering.
They were waiting on OHA to develop the rule called reducing lead in school drinking water. So that's a brand new rule from OHA, referenced by ODE, and provides the guidance to schools.
Is this a significant change in our protocols? I mean, in the way that it's done, or is it the same way we're just now having to do it according to their email?
It's the same methodology, following the EPA 3Ts, that's outlined in the OHA rule. I would say the biggest difference is this is now the ongoing part. So everything that we put in service now, we have to revisit every 6 years. And just say it's good and never come back to it. That would be, I think that would be the biggest difference, is it's the ongoing testing. The plan I'll add to also requires the school district to outline in the plan where a reader can find information on asbestos, radon, and pest management. And so that's all listed in here. But each of those matters is individually regulated already somewhere else.
So our plan has to just say where to find those other issues, but it's only the water piece that actually you have to have a plan around. Is that, I was just wondering, it seemed random. right on, it seems random, that it's, just added on to the end, is that why?
The Healthy and Safe Schools Plan did exist in 2016. It was a bit of a rushed rule from ODE. They announced it in July and passed it in, or June maybe, passed it in August. And it didn't have any reference to, it didn't have a requirement for testing water every 6 years. And so when that OHA rule was finalized, then the Healthy and Safe Schools Plan was revised to include that. So it may look like an add-on or something that we saw just a few years ago. Just any questions?
So there's $1 million allocated to reimbursing districts?
Statewide,
How much of actual cost is that gonna cover just for testing? Do we know?
it's the test fee plus $10 as an administrative fee. And in the conversations that we've had with the stakeholder groups, they've openly said that if there's more money available, they might be able to increase the administrative fee. And it doesn't really say what test fee we put forward, so it's reasonable, of course. But, in the testing of 2016 statewide, there was a lot of difference in what different labs were charging. The City of Portland did some for free. That was just a different environment where everyone was trying to test as rapidly as they could.
Seemed like there would be some opportunity for, like, the state doing some kind of contracts to push price down and
Collaborative contracts.
Yeah.
and get a nice even flow of work across. So I'm confused, the $10 administrative fee, are we paying, or they paying?
That's included in the reimbursement. So it's $2 million per biennium that's carved out of the state facilities fund. It's reducing that fund, putting $2 million biennium for water testing.
And here's how anal I am, I don't see Beaumont on the list of schools.
So it's what the staff report that says there wasn't any community engagement, was that required? Is that just listed that there isn't any because you have a template that you're filling out that asks that? But the law doesn't require it, right?
The law did not require it, correct, it's on the template. We did have significant participation in the stakeholder meetings with, initially with Senator Jim Brown and other legislators a few years ago, really the genesis of this. And then, of course, the stakeholder meetings for drinking water testing and Healthy and Safe Schools rule were well attended by school districts and occasionally other interested parties.
I'm noticing here it says that charter schools will test all required fixtures according to the testing schedule for the district in which they are located. Have we notified the charters of what our testing schedule is so they can draft behind it?
Any other questions? Okay, so we're gonna be getting a resolution
Resolution.
based on this.
Yes, clean copy for next week's agenda.
Okay. Good. And there's a deadline on this, right? It's gotta be end of June?
Yes,
It's gotta be submitted by end of June.
We submit it to ODE by July 15th. It requires adoption from the governor's board by June.
Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so I'm gonna suggest we take a 5-minute recess, yes, because the incoming board members are gonna be here at 6:30. And I have to run down to my car and get my box of stuff. So, we'll reconvene at 6:30.
Or you can leave it here. Go look at what everything. I know, I left.
No, I got it here and Julia brought it to me. I know it. Do anything. How are you dressed? To see you. What's that? It's really hard. They're sweet. You can always come back. Well, I'm sure I'm not going far because I still work at PSU and so I train teachers and because I'm still, I'm still.
What are you gonna say?
I should bring them out.
That, I mean, just our cheese pictures.
I was carrying Julie's and mine on top of mine. It said just.
I'll show you some of them.
I wrote all over it,
There you
and I
go.
took my small. Thanks for bringing mine.
That's.
Well, it was just like, I picked it up, why would I? Oh, here it is.
The main can mentor his mentor.
Thank you.
Or not that, when received. Anyway, pretty fun. And this I had to keep because I said this is lots of small pictures, things like that. Oh, what is this? Isn't that great? Yeah, Isn't it so beautiful? She gave it to my present and then I had it for his. Yeah, that's beach. Oh, I love it. Can I take a picture? Remember that photo that was taken? No, she said this is my.
It's the same. I really like, I like the soft highlight colors. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. That'd be great. And I'm waiting to go to Mexico City.
When are you going?
It's my next tattoo.
Why? Are they good?
No, I just want.
What do you
There's
want?
this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this, because you've been to Mexico City or something. There's this, zero. You kind of wear your lip is like this. Yeah. Since I live in Portland, it's Jen.
Look at, that's what Harry just showed me. Harry's picture. On the cover of the picture, my buddy. And said it just like, remember that picture that paid you forever? No, no, she just keeps it to me. It's, I love it though. It's neat.
I was want to say hi, Steve.
Picked up that it was you.
Okay.
It's too short.
Hello? Oh dear,
I was kicked by them.
hang on.
What?
Oh, you're good? You're in? Okay, all right.
All the time. Each and every day.
You're still up inside?
I've got two 24-year-olds and a 21-year-old.
Oh,
so,
jeez.
yeah.
You know the old Mark Twain line?
Which one?
That was something like when I was 6.
My girls are getting there, my boy, not so much.
You can't cook, especially.
I wonder if that's so, whether that was.
Good.
We don't do that. Well, we have some hands in that, we don't. Yeah. I would just.
I tried to call you. We were outside and we thought we were locked out. We tried the door and it was unlocked.
This is a public meeting. Except for we try and keep the board members out.
Yeah, I locked up when you're saying cleaning. Yours just went in.
Oh my God, you.
I was smiling.
Hey, hi. I was gonna ask you if you wanted help getting the box, but then you ran down.
I got that a lot.
Well, I've been doing like why did I throw my back out with these binders?
Thank you for whoever transported them around.
Oh, we had a car. But from the car to.
Yeah, so went downstairs to go bring the pocketbook. So remember to bring the keys, but not the badge. So Amy and I were sitting out there trying to call people. And then she pulled the door. It's open.
Yeah, I realized I kind of unpacked my purse to go to Seattle, and I didn't need my badge and all kinds of other stuff, and I got here too, the same thing. Oh, no. But it was over.
Okay. Is everybody back? Was Amy? Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're gonna reconvene in the work session, and we're gonna continue the discussion about goal setting. And I think the other two incoming board members will join us at some point.
I get bonus points for being.
Bonus points, total. Yes. I want that in the minutes.
Exactly. We're gonna have you all moving around soon, but what I thought we could do before we start today is just kind of talk a little bit about where we've been and then where we're trying to head towards for July 2nd. So if you'll remember the last time we had our work session, which was only a week ago, but probably feels like eons ago. It was 6 days ago. That's right. It was Wednesday. So 6 days ago, we were all together talking about sort of like how we can support you at the district around setting goals. So one of the things that we did last week was that we talked a little bit about sort of what is a SMART goal, and so AJ talked to you about kind of the sort of like what a SMART goal is, which you probably already know. But then we also spent a lot of time going into all of the data that's currently available to us. We spent some time talking about The fact that that data isn't always perfect, and it's certainly an opportunity for growth in terms of the way that we disseminate and collect and report data moving forward. Really the goal of last week was to get you all sort of like familiar and comfortable with the data in a way that, hi, here's some paper for you, here's more paper. So last week, the focus of our work together was to get you familiar with the data that was available, to start to, feel comfortable finding that information and that data, and to also kind of practice as a board, kind of reaching conclusions about the data together, so that we can build on that work tonight. So what we'll be doing tonight is focusing in on how to develop a shared analysis together. What I'm proposing tonight that we do is we start to think about trends in the data. So the first half of tonight, we'll look at trends in the 9 accountability measures that are there to understand what has been the district's performance by student group, by the TSI, CSI, Title I schools, in comparison to the state. And looking at the performance of those student groups across the 9 different accountability measures that are currently there. We'll talk a little bit about sort of what you conclude, the analysis that you have in your partners, and then we'll turn over to thinking about where are there places where there's some positive deviance. And that will be some more opportunity for you to go and find like where is the district doing well? What is sparking your curiosity? What might you want to find out more information for? So that when we go into goal setting on the 2nd, you'll have some more information and at least starting to get a roadmap. On the 2nd is when we'll take all the information that you've had from last Wednesday, from tonight, and then compare that information and sort of apply both the racial equity, social justice lens and the looking at the graduate profile in the vision, and then get into active goal setting in a sort of World Cafe style. And then we'll hopefully, by the end of our time together on the 2nd, come up with some draft goals that you can feel pretty good about, and sort of start thinking about what a revision or sort of like how you're going to continue to refine that after you get back from Boston. And have some time to think about that. So I passed out a packet of information that has.
You have one more.
Oh yes. I passed out a packet of information that has a couple of documents, and I'll go through them today, and then we'll jump into kind of moving around. So this first piece of paper is your kind of like your worksheet. This worksheet is really just a graphic organizer. You don't have to fill it all out, but it's a way for you to start to think about how you want to analyze trends. So I'm going to put you into pairs. We have different tables where there are the different accountability measures. And in your pairs, you'll kind of go through and you may decide that you want to focus in on just PPS as a district and go and look at what are the trends for African American students, for Native students, for students with disabilities. And so this is just a way for you to collect the information that you get. We'll do that for a while and then we'll come together and on the whiteboard we'll sort of start to get a sense of what are you seeing in terms of trends over the last 3 years that you and your partner came up with that you'll want to inform the overall goal setting process. The second set of papers is just kind of like a roadmap to the detailed activities that we're doing to get us through the goal setting process. So starting on page 5 is where we are starting tonight. So we're going to just describes the activity and then takes us through the questions that we'll talk about as a group. And then the second activity is described there as well. And then a way to preview what we're going to be doing on the 2nd, we also have the detailed description of those activities for the 2nd. So,
I have a question about just.
Sure.
Sort of structure, the larger sort of multimedia structure.
Oh, sure.
Just like how we're gonna get to the endpoint, because I thought that part of our discussion was that we might not wanna take what the state's goals, and so we'd had a discussion about things related to, the learner profile
Yeah.
and the graduate profile, and we also, talked about a variety of things like, college and career readiness.
Yeah.
Because like for me, the 9th grade on track, I think it's a really, blunt measurement and a pretty low standard. And so I'm wondering, because I know we don't have that much time, is like when we're gonna pivot to if we don't wanna do these 9.
So I think that's I was gonna talk a little bit about that. So I think that on the second is when we'll start to do some sort of like matching to the graduate profile, because the graduate profile, some of the accountability measures are addressed in the graduate profile, but there are a lot of places where we're not measuring, and I think you all had a discussion about sort of like they're just not captured there. So as part of the like World Cafe activity will be the opportunity for you to start thinking about like, well, what's a goal or a measure that you would want to capture in those other areas. So that beginning discussion on the second will be where we're starting to chart those out. I think the way that I'm trying to organize the information here is to use the current accountability measures as a foundation, just to start to organize that you're starting to think about like, this is the capacity that we currently have based on state and federal regulations. And so to get you really feeling comfortable with that and the data and the trends around that, so that when you do want, if you do want to pivot to other types of measures, that you have a sense of some of our growth patterns, as well as places where we're doing well that would make for a complement to the goals that you want to set. So I think we're just starting with these 9 areas as a place to to analyze and to get information, but there's lots of room to expand beyond those. And so I think we'll capture that in tonight's discussion when we're sort of doing report outs, as well as in the second.
I'm concerned timing-wise that if we spend a lot of time analyzing data of things that we may not be interested in, that we're gonna be well into the fall before we get, because what I thought I heard from the group is an interest in some non-traditional measures or coming up with their own, like here's the goal, but it is not gonna be captured necessarily in an SBAC.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I imagine that you're doing this like in tandem, right? So SBAC is one sort of set of measures, but I think it's probably important as a group and as a collective. What I found is sort of groups who are trying to sort of define goals, is that having a strong foundation of understanding like what their growth trends are, what we're currently measuring, is really important to understand. So we're just going to spend some time tonight looking at the growth rates in each of these areas, just so that you can get a sense of, well, what has been the district's history around improvement or potentially decline, and so that when you set those baseline measures and those improvement trends, so it really is just informative still. We're still in that sort of analysis place. I've done this a couple of times with big groups around measures, and I promise that that we'll be able to get to some pretty clear goals on the second, if you're worried about time there.
I'm also concerned just generally about if we use something other than the SBAC, that it's going to take the district some time to create some other or multiple measures to measure something besides just.
Well, I think it's a valid concern, and I think it's a realistic, sort of reality that it will, as you define goals, we're going to have to. There's going to be some time where both the senior leadership team and our staff are going to have to go back and figure out like what are best ways to measure that. And so I really see that sort of back and forth as. You'll notice SLT is all here, and so we're wanting to be really actively engaged, so that when we set the strategies and that we're trying to be responsive to what you all are coming up with as your goals.
Let's do it.
All right, so so this is the sort of like process document, and then just the other document here is the listing of the CSI, TSI, and Title I schools. As both Dr. Quaidar and Dr. Valentino and Brenda Martinick and the superintendent have talked about, the way that we're sort of organizing has been sort of looking at these different tiers of schools. And so I just wanted you to, if you wanted to look at and do some analysis based on this listing, that you have this here, okay? So why don't we, here's what I'm gonna have you do. So you'll get into pairs. Maybe if you don't mind, if the new board members are not paired together, but try to get with a sort of existing board member, just for like, you know, the sake of having some different perspectives. So go ahead and get into partners, and then once you're in partners, there are tables, and each table has one of the 9 accountability measures, and I think you and your partner can decide which one you want to go to. And then SLT members will kind of hang out with you and be there as a resource if you have any questions. SLT went through a similar activity yesterday, and so they have some tips and tricks. And again, I would just reiterate that this is just a suggestion for ways for you to analyze. The activity is really about you sort of like coming together and practicing that analysis in these areas so that you can sort of have a realistic sense of what growth looks like at the district. So once you get your partners, go ahead and go to one of the groups. If you don't mind putting your what accountability measure is at the top, we'll kind of collect these at the end so that we can synthesize the data for you and report back out to you.
We can take our moving boxes with us.
Yeah, you can take your moving boxes with you. I bet you can have some help to do that. So go ahead and pick a partner. How long do we have? Let's
What do you want to do? Besides time, get on track.
I want to say let's try it for like a half hour, but I'll sort of walk around and gauge like what how folks are.
Okay.
Where are you? I have course.
Sure.
So let's
Mine are
gotta find them.
Let's just take these. Should we start over here with John first?
Do you want to do math? Let's do math. I like math. I am Haley.
Where are we going? Let's go here. Are you a
Thanks.
maybe somebody's
Yeah, oh, this is great. I got colors. Oh, like this is my favorite. I get to work with Julia. We are going to be friends. Thanks so much. I suggested that, like, it's like, let's go pick our thing. And I leaned over and said, so we're going to get on track, right? She's like, no, she's like, I don't want to go on track. All right.
Right. Okay.
Now,
What are we, what's this for?
it's just the same thing. Tomorrow.
We already have questions. As I said, you oversold it on SLT. What do you want us to describe here, or is this just a?
I can
Got all my binders.
Sarah, you may want to be
Sure. Okay, I'll do this.
So one of the things we looked at the other night was that some of these, like this report card doesn't have like the math average for the state board. Or
It does, it's in a weird place.
oh, you guys found it because we
Yeah.
had to cheat it and we had to look it up online.
You're right.
At the school, so it's not on this level. It's the school level. Yeah, we use our resources well.
That's what 6 years on the board will get you.
Yeah, oh yeah.
All students.
Not in the line for the federal.
Yes.
Oh, no, I was just thinking that. So isn't it?
So increase is 41%. If you look at our across the board.
So we have the right thing. Is Oregon, is it percent?
So Oregon average is 41%, so 50% is the district profile.
So Oregon is
41. Yeah, and we're 50%. Gotcha. It's we don't have the data on the back page. It says the data for student group, but we don't have the Oregon averages for that we have the district. We have to flip to those specific schools, that's why they're listed here, and then do math. We have to do math. We picked the math bunch, so.
okay, so we just go get all these and then add them together and create an average. Okay, so let's restart with CSI.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first school is Boise Lake. Okay, so is this 16 or 17? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So you.
you can describe. Okay.
Oh, okay, great. She's putting in the spot. Okay, I'll start at the bottom with Alliance. Do I have to do both meat and vegetables? Oh no, because they're together.
Okay, regular is 14.
Well, since Alliance is a high school, it doesn't have math, because we're looking at 8th grade math numbers, right?
Rosa Parks is 14. Is 17.
We're doing the CFI.
Yeah.
I'm starting at the bottom.
Scott is 15. And then he's gonna get all the way to the bottom before Haley gets one. Where's the fresh office? Oh, it's
Good job.
That's weird. Well, you're gonna have to.
Remember
figure that out.
the
15. We're super busy using Wilson Parker. Now, if we wanted to so we should have 7 data points.
It's at 9930 North Smith Street. Well, there is an Alliance, right?
Lions doesn't have exclusive different data. Lions is 16. Well, this is just for all students. Do we want to break it down by ethnicity and student group?
Oh, we should have done that.
We'll look at all students and then maybe draw some conclusions and then perhaps deep dive on a certain type. We don't have to do it all. We don't have to fill in all the boxes.
My guess is all of those were included in your list, that you're not gonna see that much. It'd be interesting to see.
Well, Cesar Chavez,
Well, I actually,
yeah, white students with White students with Cesar Chavez are at 41%. And multiracial students are at 30, but overall all school they're at 15. So there is a huge differential. But so do you have our total percent for the CSI total? Alright, let's do the CSI. Yeah, let's do it for all, and then we can make assumptions and then verify our assumptions, and that can be our analysis of the data.
yeah, so I go all the way across to the last one, it's a smaller subgroup, we can pick every all of them.
See where, how it, yeah. Well, and actually CSI is the smallest group, but yes, let's do the TSI, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna start with Chapman. Alright, it's race. Chapman is 57. Don't make this stuff fun. Chief Joseph is 39. Very.
Summarize.
I did literally.
The best of those 28.
Irving is 47. 47. I know I'm good. James John is 28. Woodmere is 5. Kelly is 25.
Bridger is 31.
King is 8. No, 8.
George is 11.
No, but it's one of those.
Peninsula
I know,
is 19.
some of the numbers are probably,
Wayne is 21.
We want to take a 15 break, or does it have it?
Saban is 58.
Oh, yeah.
Otley is 21.
Hold on, I didn't do a line.
Yes, we're not doing high school.
We're not doing a high school, we don't care about high school.
Right. Okay, so let's
She's just waiting for the line that we do, right? I'm looking at So the data on math is different from the data for K8. So it's yeah, it's like apples and oranges. So what's our total? Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah, where do you want this?
maybe we should do this slower and more,
Thoughtfully,
so I'm just thinking we should just run
all the numbers.
one order, so this is gonna make sense. All of our,
Yeah.
So if I say, okay, this is, we're gonna do a, I'm gonna click down. So I'm gonna say route, and then I'm gonna do, so American. Yeah, so I'm gonna say, say the subgroup.
Yes.
Okay, so it's,
Yes. Do you have the whole all total?
oh shoot, this is like not set up.
So you have to flip over a page.
Oh, I was gonna do all total, which is 43. And then, am I American Indian, Vietnamese, so, American Indian, not enough data. But 32. Okay, so this, it's just for water, it's not the same water. There's a process flaw.
I noticed that when I started to write down the whole ones, is that
It would actually be better, yeah, actually be better if we copied this.
yeah.
Okay, so the first one is.
Oh, got it.
Black. Multiracial. Hawaiian Pacific Islander. White. Korean reduced. Ever English learner. Disabilities. Migrant. Tag. Female male.
Where they
No,
at
and those are suggestions, and so I was like, kind of tricky because there's like, and it's not consistent. So it's just kind of, we're creators, so we're creating our own format. I like it, I like it.
We're on task.
Really, well, it's
Yeah.
just a suggestion, there's no English language.
Try to narrow down.
So, are we starting over? Okay, so,
Did you get the all things?
yeah, so I'm on grab.
Yes. Not meeting.
22, asterisk for Pacific Islanders, 64 for white.
So I know it's small, but it's.
10, students with disabilities, asterisk for
Okay, I believe. These total all like 34.
Am I right about
Yeah,
that?
and then not enough. 35. 18. 16. This one is not enough for native. Part of that 46. 42. Not enough. 91 to 36.
Yeah, it's interesting on this is like, the individual student progress is high, and yet it went down in English, math, and science. Okay, the overall is 31. Star Asian is 39. Star Latino is 18. Multiracial Pacific Islander is 2 asterisks. White is 43. Green is lunch is 25. Ever English learner is 25. Students with disabilities 13. 2 asterisks. And then 36 and 27. That's really interesting.
Huh?
Maybe they didn't test?
Sorry.
Well, that's because Dan hasn't changed the water out there.
We're doing good.
I mean, it's a super interesting profile.
Star. And 2 stars. And then Black African American 17. Latino 45. 20. Star. 26. 41. 35. Star. Star. 25. 34. Did we have data for attendance? I can look, because this has data for tag attendance, but not for English or math. Isn't that interesting? Is that enough? So maybe those kids opted out. Maybe our tag family's more likely to opt out?
Yes.
I would not.
Well, no, because it's one of the metrics. There's 10.
No, there's not.
There's not, but I wonder if that might be part of it. That's interesting.
Well, no, I think, here's what I think it is. It's just, I think it's not, it's okay to say how many students attended.
But not give their information about.
Right, because this is just,
Yeah, it's too specific, yeah.
I'm doing Harrison Park, okay. Overall, it's 31. Okay, then American Indian, not enough students. Asian, 45. Black, 8. Latino, 30. Multiracial, 9. Pacific Islanders, master. White, 38. Free reduced lunch,
Jefferson was 90.
English, every English learner, 33. Students with disability, 10. Migrant and tag, not enough students. Female, 29. Male, 32. Okay, you're distracting us. Roger, you're distracting us.
He's asking me how many translations I read before I write a sermon. All right, so Fabian, overall is 12. Asterisk or star. I can't say asterisk very well. So star for Asian as well. 8 for Black and African Americans. 5. 19. Star. 24. 7. Less than 5%. 8. Star. Star. 12. 12. Okay, so that's weird too because regular attenders tagging 91%, English 91%, math not enough students.
Because it might be so low.
That's odd.
Okay, well, know that.
Yeah.
Or that makes me wonder. Question. Sarah, are you ready? This is Marysville.
Yeah.
40% district-wide or school-wide. American Indian, not enough students. Asian, 69. Black, 22. Latino, 6. Multiracial, 30. Native Hawaiian, not enough. White, 39. Free and reduced lunch, 31. Sorry. Is 31. Ever English learners, 47. Students with disabilities is 6. Migrant, not enough students. Talented, gifted, 95%. And then female, 36. And male, 43.
45. Star. 49. 15. 43. Ours is basically flat. Star. 26. 31. 12. Star. Star. 47. 43. Our kids are designated as tag and math, but not in English language or vice versa. So that might be part of why the math doesn't have enough students for the language.
Especially
That they would be more likely to be tagged in language arts. But this is, math doesn't have enough tag kids. But English language arts does. Okay, 7.
there's no data.
Oh.
And I was like, where is it? Another process flaw.
So flags are our average. Julie's looking for that. We want to fill out the whole sheet.
I don't know about that. I've already got a bingo.
Yeah, what's our price for bingo? It could be 3 binders. If I like color coded binders.
They had like 60% on this
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, that's what Joe was explaining. Yes. And this one is one senior behind.
approximately 25%.
Yeah.
Had been at 8 or more before they ever got to that. How many got? What does it say? It was about 25%. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the year in which it's occurring. It's the year that it comes out.
I think at the Roosevelt, 25% is also Roosevelt, and then it does more and more.
Yeah, they were.
Before they ever got there. And
Wow.
really nasty statistic. Wasn't state court. Nationwide. Many
Multiple on our list.
Other is so
Multiracial.
some big intervention.
6 months.
What did you say it was 23?
Yes, right.
Uh-huh.
Our sports kids are so bad.
And just one of the raw data,
The later one. So they've been in 12 or more schools. No wonder they're graduating. No wonder those kids finish till they get out of bed in the morning.
So the team of four is terrible.
Sorry, Mike.
This is terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I got to just go
Okay.
think about.
This is our, oh no, that's.
Yes. There was a work session.
Let's stick with this.
Yeah.
So what was the African American most recent? 8th grade result was
17. From 67. And this one was 67.
Yeah. 467. 67.
How about this one?
We.
results for 8th grade kids. And
Higher than the district average. Or higher than the district average.
Female is 33. It was 67.7. So you're rounding up, so it'll be 71 versus 60.
it's not disaggregated that way. So go to
So I filled in all the read my writing, all the data.
And then the state.
So this is 65.
If I can't tell this, I wrote it in Greek.
Can we
we do this?
I could read
Just
these.
do this CSI.
So are you guys, one draw conclusions and try to, we definitely see,
I'd like to do the CSI school since there's only a few of those, or do the same thing we just did if you're getting.
data shows you.
Right.
If we were really right, if you have this is like a 3-year
Same
trend.
systems.
Right.
Unless we're.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and then that's a different one. That's in the back.
No, it's, you could do, couldn't you get it right from here?
Oh, yeah, from there.
Isn't that, Sarah, how you do it? You're gonna do.
This is the maps trend on the back of this, right?
You don't mind being the flipper? No.
That's in the back of that. Yeah. So this is just for the most recent.
So we're gonna do CSI?
I mean, I guess that's part of it too, is the 3-year trend. Do we want to look at a 3-year trend, or do we want to do CSI?
Years.
I mean, it's.
No, that's what Claire was doing when she was in Lori actually has a spreadsheet.
6 years.
Well, so like you said the question about student data was higher, and then there was a
Stage of student progress was high, and then
but things have gone down. I think I read it around.
Significantly above the state average. So,
The website, when it comes to, was that
Oh, it's once.
So I'm looking at, I think the 3-year average, I'm like Cesar Chavez, and I'm looking at their 3-year average on maps. And it looks like across populations, except for Hispanic, it was like at a level, one up, one down. So 15, 16, 14 for all students, 15, 16, 14 economically disadvantaged, but 9, 11, 5 for English language learners. But students with disabilities buck that trend as well. But the black students was 6, 8, 7. Hispanic students it was 14, 13, then 8. So they definitely went. So it's like there's Native Islander 25, then 11, then 18. So there's it looks like some students are making gains, some are not, and some are in the line and join us.
Yeah, we're just.
How about,
So this is just like practicing data analysis.
that's back. Oh, no, that's.
Broken out by grade band, at which point there is actually data for all the subgroups. And so
That's gonna be about
you're kind of fitting in the stuff that you just worked out.
Where do you see that? Let's do that. Oh, in the book.
So I'm just trying to understand what this is related to. First time failure of algebra. I'm not tracking what you're saying, but
I was like,
That
I may be a little bit slow.
There's the head nod.
It's a good trick.
Okay.
That makes a bit more sense.
Yeah.
Well, there's two. One is the high school, kids who transition to high school, the other, the data that show.
So our white students.
Okay, say that again.
The other one
For the
is
state.
performance and
Got that down to you.
Okay.
Well, it's
Pretty awesome. Wow. Okay. No,
That's Roosevelt. Oh, okay.
So it'd be interesting if you do.
And I know, sorry,
Do you have one of these in English?
I can
Year
pull
before
it.
50.
I don't have it.
Oh, yeah, it's your, that other side of the world.
We have.
Oh, right. And then the other thing, sorry, I find this interesting, these are our SBAC distributions, that's our grade distributions. The preponderance of our students, like, again,
You're not documenting very well. You need to something.
50% of our white students are totally proficient, and yet 80% of those are. So we've got some pretty significant.
So Jefferson, or Roosevelt.
So third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and then this.
Yeah.
It says reading, math.
Overall
So they-
academic performance marks by core subject, like math, science, yeah.
Well, that would be more helpful.
We're discovering all sorts of
Different, but there's still, like, you can see that disconnect between, if Smarter Balance is that criterion kind of at a national level saying this is what a third grader should know, we're not hitting it. But then if you look at kids' grades, and so for me, this is one of the reasons that our math assessment is so important, because it's starting to give us a measure across the district that we can kind of start to talk about. Because like I get questions from parents, why kids keep getting straight A's in math, but they didn't get Einstein's push math?
That's, that was one thing came up a ton at middle school. It came up a ton, because my friend was like, my daughter got straight A's in math, why is she not ready for the back to math?
And she's not straight A's, and she's.
They say those are pencils. Yeah, I was just looking
Right.
at that. I was surprised.
So, we had a discussion with someone about reports at our last meeting.
Fairly close.
Standards-based report cards are in all the elementary schools.
Wow.
I don't know, some of the,
This graduation is
okay, yeah. But they do just the individual ranking. The subjects.
I saw those.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, but it's not 80, it's the only and then at the middle school, it's a mix of letter grades from South West Side, and then basically get rid of all the standards-based.
So we, like, some of us had letters, we had letter grades, but some of this, like the science teachers were proficiency based grading. And the problem with that is that science teachers, when they put those proficiency based grading into synergy, a 3 became a C, and a 2 became an F. So it was this like disconnect between what proficiency meant, and then changing that to a straight percentage.
But you guys are letter grades.
But we got letter grades. But the other science teachers had figured out a way to like do the formula to make it work.
Better in these formulas, but
Yeah.
the way synergy is
Probably is based on 100%. So if you get a 3 out of 4, that's 75. A 2 out of 4 is 50.
But do we still have a system that proficiency side where some middle schools have? Because like Classworks, like, Classworks, they had a proficiency based no grades. And then my son transferred down to.
Yeah. Just too bad, I just followed
I honestly.
Yeah, they're so easy to just like,
It was a super hot topic.
Yeah, of course I remember those grades.
The whole district was gonna go there, and they rolled it out on the east side, and then they tried to roll it out on the west side, and the west side said no.
Okay, in about 5 minutes, I'll have you guys start reporting out, and if you could focus your report out on what were the trends or trend that you observed, and tell us about what happened over the 3 years. Okay, so what was the observable 3-year trend that you want to report out? And then we'll do that in about 5 minutes.
We have problems with our worksheet. Don't like the order.
So, I mean, it's interesting that
That's a really significant.
The district.
Five.
Do you have the Oregon? Yeah. Where's that? I can't. I teach in
Oh, yeah, so what is like,
yeah, but that's
So
it's not there.
I suggest that Andrew.
You want me to record out there?
So this just has the breakdown of PPS.
From my
It doesn't
What
have.
about this?
lived experience, that one thing that
Wouldn't it be this?
the count of
That's the district, not the state. Because that's what we wanted for Oregon to compare to Oregon State.
That's awesome.
Or do you want to do the 3-year track? No, I was trying to find 4 years.
Anyway, maybe we should just answer.
Well, I think that tag question is interesting. How there's some data from that tag was. And I think there's a question about, I would assume there's a tag map and not tag language. Especially when they're English learners,
Max is good.
Yeah, just I like found two lines.
Algebra, the first thing they take. I only do math like up to 3rd grade. So after that, I made it through high school, right? Like I graduated. And
You were saying.
that makes sense, and I haven't been I'm like exiting. So algebra is first, and then.
Just so much to know in high school.
Right, but like my kiddo who's in back to school. But that's interesting. What's that? Does that help with that algebra?
I don't want to take that home.
Yeah.
Leadership positions, so they good people.
Because I wondered, I struggled with geometry in algebra when I was in school. But that's with spatial awareness. So I was curious in geometry, the geometry helped Are you noticing things where
Well, I just think it's.
this is higher than the
Well,
average?
for example,
It's tier 1 title school, and just title only. CSI.
Just high school.
it's a labeling problem.
Yeah, this is.
So, actually, it's interesting
It's small that
because
it's hard to really know
the
anything.
Title I school is actually outperformed, yes, not by much, but.
That's why I was curious
What
to
is
do
interesting
this data point of the CSI schools.
So you can have schools that.
You're buying all the data points, aren't you? Tell them why they can't this in case of it. Not bad.
We were following this, but tier 1 is different. It's the other schools that aren't title. So TSI and title are tier 2. So this cohort is tier 2. And then tier 1 is everybody else. It's not on these lists.
They're not.
Danny, we have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so tier 3 is CSI, which we get, this group. Tier 2 is TSI and title,
Yes.
and then tier 1 is everybody else.
Everybody does, yeah. So we actually,
Okay.
well,
Yeah.
Our data sucks. Our data is incorrectly labeled.
Actually,
No, I don't know what it is.
I think you could almost say, like,
Swedish or that's what I thought I was gonna say.
even with that, actually, it makes it
Well, Swedish,
so.
yes, I know someone who's Swedish.
Yeah. We were being better than the state average on that one.
Yeah, well, no matter what. There's reference.
How sicky is that?
I went through this at
Yeah.
It's like so generous. To me, the interesting news was
breakout of the SAT is would be interesting because it really indicates what kind of
PPS does, regardless of school you're in, with some of the subgroups.
That number there, the upper English learner is only 27, but in the Title I schools it's 33.
not exactly as she gets in the state.
With some data population.
SAT will didn't get to that. It's about your blood pressure, it's about what it
So
Right, so
you're
the
doing-
only data point we have for Oregon is the all student data.
Poorly, but better with those groups than everyone else in the state. That's a different story.
There is.
Where? Oh, huge, yeah. And they were some of the first in they have
Other way
two
around,
smalls
so
on their board.
our students that they allowed for the first time to take it.
Yeah.
Students are Black and Hispanic, and that's disproportional to our district. So our Black and Hispanic students are overrepresented in students that they allowed for the first time to take it. And then our students actually closer, like, to it, because Beaverton fails to us. But Beaverton comprehensive high schools, that because they have 3,000 high schools, they can have.
Right.
So just an observation is that
Okay, why don't we come back to the table, and we can start our discussion. Try to remember what group you're in. Come on back to the table.
the year before. I'm just doing arrows.
We're so deep into the data. We can't tear ourselves away.
Let's go.
Come on back to the table.
All yours.
I'm sure there will be many. I know, I never asked.
I just want to name that guy. Let's start with the
Her name, but just the woman who was facilitating the reservation criteria process for class.
Look, she's really
Wednesday, the offers of Red pants. Did you know that one of those guys there was our new board member?
He was talking trash.
Oh, wait, what did you hear about?
Yeah.
I actually wasn't there because I was here.
I was
Christy
gonna say.
Lindholm was there.
Who was it?
Christy Lindholm.
Oh, she's
Awesome. That was here.
Curly, super curly hair.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
They look
Other
alike.
schools asked
Look
for
back
it.
to some-
They,
All
no,
right.
they don't. They don't.
As soon as Rita and Julie join us, we'll get started. Okay, how was that for you?
A little frustrating.
Frustrating? Say
Well,
more about how it was frustrating.
Our topic was the 4-year graduation rate. So you're just looking at high schools, obviously. So then when you get into virtually any subgroup other than white kids, the numbers are just so small that you can't really trust what might be a trend or what is just anomalous information.
Yeah. So
I
we'll
also had a
start
question.
talking about how you all got into sort of like defining what a trend was. And I think the point is to try to figure out like how are you going to, as a collective, sort of realistically set what you want those goals to be. So if you remember from your SMART goal worksheet, kind of like that baseline, understanding what the baseline is, and then also sort of like how you want to set the trajectory for growth. I think is a good conversation to have. Other folks, how was it for you?
It was depressing.
Depressing? Say more about why it was depressing.
Well, just the numbers are so low in some of the subgroups, that, I mean, I think, people always think, oh, my graduation rate isn't very high. And it's like, well, that's a little higher than like some of these numbers. I think people, if they knew that you have numbers in the teens and 20s,
Yeah.
revolution if it were in other schools.
Of our 29 schools, only 6 improved.
What was your
Math achievement is what we're looking at. So of the 29 schools on the CSI, TSI, and Title I list, only 6 showed improvement from the prior year. So that's also
6 out of 30?
6 out of 30.
And this is prior to their designation, which
Right.
got them
Right,
to
yeah.
now the task.
Right.
And so what's the intervention at some point?
Right.
So that's a nice segue. Why don't we start having you record kind of like what were the trends that you observed, and I think we'll just kind of have a conversation about, if you don't mind, sort of like what did you observe in terms of trends, sort of like what was your takeaway, and then other board members, I think this is the time to ask questions of your peers around sort of like how did you define a trend, like did you notice this, and then what I'll do is try to collect what those trends are, so that you can start thinking about how these conclusions might inform or not inform your eventual goals that are there. So it sounds like the math group. Also, thanks to all of the senior leadership team and all of the folks who are here to help contextualize the data. So the math team, do you want to start with your trends? It seems like you started. And so I'll write them down and then we'll have a little bit of discussion.
So we didn't really do trends over 3 years. We just we had a hard time with just analyzing and capturing the data at first. So the fact that the list in the report card was different than this list in the order, like just trying to get that rhythm of, okay, and then this asked for like African immigrant or North African Middle Eastern that we don't have disaggregated data for. That was a little challenging. And then we just like matched this to this. So again, we did what was tier 1, we did as Title I. So we kind of made some unique adjustments on our sheets. Another thing, one of the questions we came up with was we noticed on some schools that there were not enough students to report on a math tag data point, but there were on English language arts. And that was interesting because we kind of made the assumption that students would be tagged in math but not in English language arts if they were ever English learners. And so we weren't sure why there were, and is it just that students weren't tech identified, or did they opt out, or what's the difference there with high numbers in English language arts and not in the test? And then we also noticed that some schools had an attendance report on tech students, but not test. So again, it's like, is it such a small cohort that it's too personalized to share their SBAC data, but it's fine to put their attendance data? So we had some questions about how that gets marked and what that means, and how those students are kind of identified.
So while we did less of the 3-year, we did a comprehensive across board. I think one of the things we noticed is that, well, for PPS in general, in math, of all the subgroups, only 4 were over 51%.
Could you tell me which 4 subgroups they were?
Asian, white, talented and gifted, and female. And then it's interesting and unfortunate, but in many cases, if you were, for example, a Latino generally in PPS, the achievement level was the same as it was in, this was the Title I schools.
Didn't matter where you were.
Right.
And I would add it was actually 5 subgroups because multiracial's on the other side of the page.
Right. And then
That's true.
for example, like black students in PPS, 12% were meeting benchmarks, and in Title I schools it was 15%. So both very low, but Title I actually was a little bit higher than an all PPS number.
But that's true, I mean, that's true nationally in all kinds of schools, and it's unfortunately probably true at like Forest Park. You see that.
Well, the one thing, it wasn't true across the board. Like, for example, females in PPS in math were at 54, and in Title I schools it was 33. So there was a bigger differential versus where we saw in some cases it didn't matter what school you were in. If you were in a particular disaggregated group, your achievement didn't improve even if you're in a high ranking school or.
And you talked about that there wasn't growth, that first thing. I didn't write that down, but you
Yeah,
said
so
that.
we only did a 1-year look at growth because the handy little sheet on this has the downward or upward arrow.
Yeah.
On the front page, and so we looked at that there of the we didn't count Tubman because there's not data because we don't have it yet, but of the 29 then schools, only 6 showed growth. And then we did look at a couple of different schools with, it's very interesting to look at. There's for Cesar Chavez, for example, students are at a percentage, it goes up a little bit in year 2, and then it goes down again in year 3. And that's the trend for several of the different groups. But then you have a group where it was high, and then it got lower and lower. Or it was high, it went lower, it went back up. So it's hard to look at those and say, what's specifically happening in this school? It's not, everybody's not doing the same thing. So is this just their small populations, so an outlier child kind of skews the whole average, or why is this data different across these different populations? Great.
Okay. Any other observations in math achievement or growth? Do the other board members have any questions about their methodology or about the way that they approach the data? You're really good about describing sort of like what you did, but does anyone have any questions?
To be fair, we had 2 schools that showed no change. So there were 6 that improved and 2 that.
So here was just a general observation also that could apply across other groups. This was an I wonder question. But you had some schools where the individual student progress was high, and yet all of the English language arts, math, and science were all down arrows, and it's like, how could that be?
Yeah, so how is individual student progress measured?
It's language arts and math
But they were like down arrows and we saw them several times.
So is that a
They
growth
started
versus
higher.
achievement? That's growth versus achievement, right?
Yeah. Oh, at least that's what the first page, after there's a little explanation.
That's what that says.
Great, okay. Any other questions from your peers about what you just heard?
And remind me again, that growth is not the same student tracking, it's, what do they mean by growth?
It is what it says, year to year progress. I mean, this is, I'm just reading.
This cohort versus the next cohort? As opposed to
Yeah, 'cause
this
that's not
third
real
grader.
growth.
They're not tracking students.
No,
it
it's
says
not a
it's-
cohort, it's one,
One class
third grade
versus
1
another.
year, third grade next year, third grade after that.
Yeah.
It's not the same
It's not
thing.
the same.
Well, it says individual student progress. Is how it's labeled.
Well, it's a good one to get more info on, because that's really unclear and they
And
didn't
good luck
describe it
finding the
very well.
information on the ODE page, because it's ain't there, that's what I'm looking for.
Call someone, that's right.
All right. Okay, any other questions or comments? Any other things that you would add to the math group?
And just remember the dates, these are for 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and 4 years ago.
17.
2 years ago.
And we didn't do high schools. That's
Oh,
another
and you
important piece,
focused-
because the way the high school data is displayed is different than the K5, or no, yeah, K8, there we go. And so we just chose not to look at the high schools.
Thank you for clarifying.
But the data was equally bad. We did take a little field trip with Susan into high school math, and it was depressing.
Okay. Anyone
We're
else?
reorienting the whole instruction around that.
Yeah,
High school math instead of like,
they fixed it.
well, no, but instead of like, okay, looks like credit recovery for you guys, it's like, maybe we should do something differently if more than half our kids are flunking algebra. Maybe that's on us.
Algebra is the highest failure rate, first time failure rate is 18%.
Say that again.
Algebra failure rate is 18% first time students.
It's the highest failure rate.
And that data point
Is that algebra 1,
gets
2, or?
even worse when you take it the second.
No way.
Yeah, it does. 43%
Fail it the second time.
failure rate.
Yeah,
And
because
if a
we
student
changed how we
fails
teach
algebra
it
the
the
first
second
time
time.
they take it, they have a 40% graduation rate.
Say that again, Sarah.
If a student fails algebra the first time they take it, they have a 40% graduation rate.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
1/3 of the students who fail algebra the first time they take it are Black and Hispanic, which is a gross overrepresentation for
Yeah,
our district.
yes, yeah.
This is why districts are redoing their scope and sequence of the secondary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
maybe it should be.
and we redid ours the opposite way, right? In terms of
I'll
compacted
share
math.
with you San Francisco's longitudinal study, what's happening there.
I'd like to see that. Off the charts, good.
Good. White kids do better, black kids do better.
We like that.
All right, let's
We
move
went
on
the
to the
opposite
next group. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the, let's give the math group they went first. Okay, which group wants to go next?
We're reading,
Okay, yeah, let's go over to English Language Arts.
but we looked at elementary only,
Okay,
because I'm all about third grade reading.
okay.
Um,
And so you focused on third grade reading?
Well, it's elementary scores, but kind of targeting third grade reading. So we looked across the tiers and noticed trends like basically nobody was doing well. We've got, for example, that's the trend.
That's your smart
For example,
brow.
yeah, but it's scary. We have got kids in a CSI school, ever English learners, 7.3%
Yeah.
at benchmark, or 5.2 kids with disabilities, Latino 13.2. Now, it gets slightly better whether they're a CSI or a TSI, and a tier 1, just a little bit. Although sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the difference in achievement with the tier 2 and tier 3 schools. They're just equally bad.
with all of the usual suspects being the lowest achievers. What I also looked at was looking at the literacy cohorts for the adoption of that bundle. In trying to think of the years of this data and when did cohort 2 start, when did they start using the bundle, the literacy, balanced literacy?
2017.
Oh, cohort 2, because the
Cohort-
first year
cohort
was
two.
16,
Correct.
17.
Cohort 2.
So this was just 1 year of their data on that. Well,
Yes.
it's hard to tell anything because there's always gonna be a dip with a new program. I don't know. But there are schools that we looked at were like James John, King, Markham, and Rigler that are just so low.
But
So your main takeaway is that you have significant needs for growth because the numbers are so, the achievement scores are so low.
Yeah, but you were saying something.
we looked at just because we looked at one school on the west side that was not a CSI, TSI. And in each category, the scores were double what they were.
And that school is
Roughly.
Markham. It's still a very diverse school. But yeah, that's about double.
So do we know,
Some triple.
did all those schools have the same rollout of the reading curriculum?
No,
So
so,
only some had it.
so we looked at just,
Can you
James John, Rigler, and Markham were 3 schools we looked at. They were in the second cohort of the adoption. So,
do you notice any measurable,
Well, this would have been the
Trends.
first year.
the first year?
yeah, so you can't tell anything. But I mean,
And it's also 2 years of professional development, 2 years of coaching. Right?
But also,
Or-
what you had from the very beginning is because of the fun, someone with writing versus reading.
Yeah.
Someone with reading versus writing.
so we should look
And
at.
so that's sort of
Why we do
how
the
the
same?
PD put it out for the very first cohort.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't have all the materials for the reading.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of.
So Sitten would be interesting to look at. That's who we should look at, who was at cohort 1 of the adoption.
We'll come back to it.
terrible.
Yeah, you don't,
It's-
don't look.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just far out.
So one thing, just thinking about curriculum, this is a question, is how do we capture data on students who move? So this whole thing, if they start the school year at Sitten and end at Whitman, and we don't have the same curriculum at the 2 schools,
You know, we do have, I haven't seen it reflected in here, but we do have data on mobility. Leslie Odell has that, cause
To where they go, or they start and where they end?
no, but just tracking achievement for kids who move. You know, like, for example, last year at James John, 2/3 of kids there either started the year late or left early. So the majority of kids were not there for the entire school year.
so this is what amazing teachers were saying, the importance of GBC is that
Yeah,
wherever
right.
they
Yeah.
are, there's going to be a scope and sequence that is somewhat
That they can,
Regardless of curriculum material.
that they
right?
can
'Cause
attach
I
themselves to.
hear your questions around what cohort were they in, where they got a bundle of material. Is what books are on their shelf more relevant than what observed practices we see in these schools? Which do you think is gonna have a bigger impact?
Years ago, New Zealand, every day every school was on the same page of the same book.
Do that in France too.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know.
Soviet Union too.
Well,
All right.
despite some public opinion out there, we're not being directed about a prescriptive curriculum. We're saying there's a lot of need for professionals to use their educator judgment, given the diverse learners in front of them. And so here are the resources, and here are lessons other teachers perhaps in your neighborhood or across the district are using. And the more we iterate on it, the better we have those resources being available for lesson planning purposes.
Just thinking we could save a lot of money having one third-grade teacher over the megaphone in each of the school rooms.
Factory model.
Charlotte's Web, chapter 3.
All right, before we digress,
I got it.
let's keep on,
What were
any
you
other
saying?
things that you would add, Julie or Rita, about the noticings or trends or anything else about the data before we move on?
Their talented and gifted was not rated except in the multiracial, no, we didn't rate in our schools.
It's, I don't, that's not as talented and gifted is not a state category, right?
So I'm looking at Sitten.
It wasn't for the individual schools that we.
Okay, was
So I'm looking at Sitten and it has over 95% on the regular attender, which tells me there are tag kids in that school. But it says for the English language arts and the math, it says not enough students. So I think you guys have the same issue we did.
So that's,
Can I see that?
8%
I
of
thought this
math.
was another, like, sounds to say, but you had some schools where there were no tag kids, and like, I don't believe it. It's like, oh, there aren't any tag kids in Southeast Portland. So, one,
It's the water.
pardon?
It's
The water.
They're not being
We know
identified
that about our.
at some schools.
Right, and so,
They're not
I mean, it's just clear that that is a gap that,
So,
that
And it's
looking at the
totally
data.
correlated to race. You,
Rita, you had a
you could go through the data year by year going back to 2002, and all you need to know about any school is what the tag rate is, and from that you can predict with total accuracy the percentage of kids who are of color, the percentage of kids who are low SES. You can tell who the teachers are, how long they've been practicing, what the enrollment trends are, absolutely everything. That's all you need to know.
I mean, I'm saying that in that we know there's gifted kids of all races across our school district, and we're only recognizing in one category in this district. So what about all the other categories of giftedness that the federal government defines? We don't have kids with musicianship, leadership, creativity, writing, literature. I mean, those are other categories other districts recognize we don't here.
And which, interesting, for example, Whitman, there's just not enough students in tag to.
Right, to be, yeah. Rita, did you have a question?
yeah, this was a,
Or,
this was a, no, it was a question.
Uh-huh.
It just like, I don't get it. So we ran into a number of schools, a number of categories where there were apparently not enough students to be reported, so it's like not rated, and yet in the 3-year average, they had a rating.
Oh.
So,
Well,
What is that?
if you have, 10, 10, 10, but then you have 30, then you're above
Yeah,
the threshold.
I mean,
where you're not gonna identify, that's readily identify.
I mean, that was kind of what I thought, but I would sort of like to get an actual answer.
Well, you just got an answer from an economist.
So it must be right.
Get the,
But
get
the
the-
economists never agree on anything.
All right, I'm gonna move us along. So unless there's any other questions for ELA, why don't we move on to the next group?
So we can go, right?
Okay, who wants to share their findings, okay?
Four-year
four-year graduation rates.
Okay.
We looked at, the grade school data was terrible.
Those kindergartners are not graduating from high
We
school.
compared the states, the districts, and Jefferson and Roosevelt, which are both PSI, for African American students and Latinx students. And again, we noted, Asian isn't broken out, so it's African immigrant. We wonder about ever English learner, about how much of that data is actually accurate, and so on. We also noticed that for some reason, there was, I think it was what, African Americans were a 3-year average, and every other category was the most recent year in the book, with no explanation. And it wasn't a numbers issue, because there were smaller populations that used 1 year. Who knows?
Is that column that has
Yeah, that was
how
that,
it was
yeah.
rated? Yeah, that was really awkward.
So why sometimes the 3-year average versus the 17, 18 rate?
Right.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
no way to tell why one measure was evaluated over the other. But also, wasn't there a labeling issue too, with the data being off by, I don't know if it was an academic year or.
Yeah.
We had
It was hard
fresher
to-
data than the
So
state. What was?
we went online to get last year's data, so we actually had 4 years that we were looking at. Which,
Cool. Throwing it down, I like it.
yeah. That's still barely enough to talk about a trend.
Say more about that.
Well, rule of thumb in economics is 3 in a row consistent before you can say it's a trend. Just because there's always noise in data, especially we're comparing different years, different kids, a lot of noise. And then when you get down to the high school level, there were
Talking about 15 kids, 20
or
kids,
18 or
subgroups.
and so we went, whoa, a lot of fluctuation there, and then we found out it was 18 total kids. So a change of 1 is 5 percentage points. So a lot of noise. So the one result that might be a trend was Latinos at Roosevelt that went 59, 54, 72, 69. One more year, and then I'd say, okay, there's a significant change. And it was like roughly 100 kids.
Yeah, it's a decent size.
Again, with all the stuff about, what do we mean graduate? Just.
The
give-
trend
given-
is like this though.
Given that, no, it was 2 years low, 2 years higher.
But aren't you looking at the change from year to year? From if you start at 59 and you go to 53, that's a drop. And then you go to 72, that's a significant increase.
And then 69, so.
And 69 is a drop from 72. It's like a mountain.
But 69, 72 average of around 70 versus in the 50s. That seems like.
I would buy that one, but it still seems like it's
Well,
kind
I
of going
want,
up.
again, I want to see 1 more year before I could say,
I can tell you
okay,
what that year's
something-
gonna be.
Something might be different at that school.
It's gonna be 74. It's gonna go back up there.
Okay, we got it.
So Roosevelt appears to be a positive deviate from the high school.
It's generally positive, but
Everything else
spreading
was,
up.
was
Bent the
sawtooth.
it is, yes. It's up from 59.
All right, other sort of observations that you'd want to share?
Well, do you want to give our summary of what we just covered in the trends across the TSIs for those subgroups? The overall finding?
Overall findings for the trend was outside of that one school, it doesn't look like a trend. The levels varied greatly. African Americans at Jefferson were in the 80s on average versus states, and PPS average in the high 60s.
So above state and PPS?
Yeah, Roosevelt, again, I think a pretty small population, so not really. That was 18 kids a year, roughly the state average.
I like the rigor.
Well, it's
No,
also
it was Jefferson had the small Latino population, that was 18, and it went, but again, we're talking a couple of kids, so are you gonna draw a conclusion there?
Well, we certainly can't compare amongst, we can't do any comparison school to school without disparity in the universe of kids, the number of kids.
Okay.
But, I mean, what's interesting is, we were saying we didn't have much faith in any of these trends because the subgroups are so small, but when you start to have a more uniform curriculum and more uniform professional development, you can start to get meaning from school to school comparisons. If you're implementing the same strategies, then that's relevant, whereas now you have no idea. So if what's going on is similar.
So the other thing to look at when you're comparing one year to another is, on the one hand, we know like special education populations are increasing. What we're hearing is trauma care is more needed at the same time as we're having gentrification. So there's a lot of apples and oranges in there that we need to keep in mind before we make conclusions.
So an interesting fun fact on graduation rate that Steve was just reminding me of is that 98.9% of the kids playing sports graduate.
Well, that's because you can't play sports if you're not
I was
gonna
gonna say, is that
graduate.
because they're doing
Yeah.
better, or because the teachers are making sure they pass it?
Well,
continue
And
playing sports?
because you lose your,
Well, if you
you
don't take
lose your
5
athletic
credits,
eligibility.
I mean, a lot of seniors are taking the required more credits than other seniors because they have to take that in order to be able to play.
But you lose your athletic eligibility if you fail a class, so.
Theoretically.
Well,
No, it may be
I
a good
think-
thing.
I
It could
know.
also be, we also saw the grade inflation right at this table as
Right.
well. I
Yeah.
have a hard time believing that there aren't
I know.
some athletes who are being passed for that.
And there's like skeptics.
Wait, I forgot where you work, I'm sorry.
There's a lot of data, but my guess is if you had like what kids are in band,
Yeah,
is
I mean,
that
I
you
know
would
that's
see
I know
A
that
similar, yeah, like you have the data on that.
So in a few moments, we can come back to, or you can kind of try to bear out some of those places and see where there might be some positive deviance. So we'll come back to that.
So Andrew was part of our math group, he came in a little late, but he
Call
noticed
me out,
that,
Haley.
yeah, anytime. You guys weren't here, but I was the first person here of us,
Yeah.
and new people, so I asked if I got special points for that.
Is this the absentee and tardiness
No,
measure?
but you had a very good point, which is about the grade inflation that we saw with looking at the cohorts of like where they were on SBAC, and like if you look at white students, it's pretty much like 25% in each, and yet if you look at the grading, it was how much was on meets, 70?
Yeah, at least, yeah, there's, huge numbers of kids on the, if you look at the grade, are
this is the
doing well.
criterion versus the norm. So, yeah.
So I'm didn't quite get what you're comparing, how many are passing SBAC
On a
versus?
criterion-based test, SBAC, you see much lower numbers of students meeting versus the definition of meeting and grades. So
C or higher.
Well, so this is in elementary where they get like meets or exceeds of their grades. So if they don't get a C, they get an M or an E or whatever it is.
never close to meeting, and
Yeah.
exceeding.
So you would expect to see a correlation between meeting grade level expectations and meeting proficiency
Should be.
rates.
But it's
But
a
not.
huge
Yeah.
difference.
Oh.
Sarah had a really
Is that what you're,
interesting
that was the, where that
chart.
inflation came from?
when she showed you the right chart.
You
All
have
right.
those
But I think
lined up
that goes
right
back
next
to our
each other.
math data, and that's just a key data point that Andrew brought up that I thought was really important.
The criterion versus the proficiency.
But the question is, which is more accurate?
True, but there is a disparity, so that's good to know. That different data sets are giving us different information.
Yeah.
I guess.
Okay,
So let's move on to the next group, our final group, which was 9th grade on track. So, what do we got here?
Oh, a lot of racial disparities.
Okay.
Overall, we're going up, but inside the district, broken down, it's only white, Pacific Islander, and students with disabilities whose 9th grade readiness is going up. Everybody else has been trending down. And tier 3 high schools, we only have Alliance, and Alliance didn't have enough kids in any category for data. But tier 2, we've got Jefferson and Roosevelt. both of which are trending down overall,
The total population.
total population. White in both is trending up, but almost all other groups are trending down. African American at Roosevelt is trending up. Students with disabilities at Roosevelt are trending up. Pretty much anyone else who's identified is trending down. Now, the interesting thing, and you have to look at health or grade inflation. While ninth grade readiness is going down at both those high schools, the grad rates are going up. So a thing to question, I think, is perhaps this is a good measure for wealthier, whiter schools. Is it a good measure for economically challenged schools? Or are there other factors playing in, such as how teachers and administrators respond on a case-by-case basis?
More effective interventions.
Is this,
Yeah.
hold on, this is
Paul,
ninth
can
grade
I-
on track?
Yeah.
Paul, can I ask, so you said that for Roosevelt, that the grad rates were grad rates were going up, but also in the tier 2 schools, where you saw, is that right? I didn't hear it.
The two tier, I'm sorry, the two tier 2 schools
Yes,
are Jefferson and Roosevelt.
yes.
In both schools, ninth grade readiness has been trending down, but the grad rate has been trending up for both of them.
Coming in lower but leaving higher.
Yeah.
What's the definition of readiness again?
That off the top of my head, I don't have any idea.
It's not ninth grade on track, it's ninth grade, so this is like kids coming out of 8th grade.
It's like with a C in.
So it's the,
Freshman year.
it's
Joe, do you
the,
want to tell us?
it's the number of credits they acquire in their freshman year.
Oh, this is
But
ninth grade
they're
on track.
On track.
Ninth grade on
Yeah.
track.
That's right.
Okay, so a question that we don't maybe have that I would ask is how they're being scheduled in, and I would be interested to look at their 8th grade scores. My sense is just the ones who aren't at grade level in 8th grade, no surprise, they don't leave 9th grade on track to graduate. But it'd be interesting to see that. 'Cause
Well, student mobility is hammering both of those student populations really heavily. And the grad rates for those kids are horrible. If you change high schools after the start of the freshman year, grad rate goes down to 53%.
Other questions for this group?
Paul, could you say that last sentence again?
For
Grade
students
goes
who
down.
change high schools after graduation, or I'm sorry, after the start of their freshman year, the grad rate goes down to 53%.
Where do you see that data?
That
Where
was
do we
in
have
the
that?
summary. It's the
Cause we were looking for that.
last paragraph in the first big section.
I can find it. We were
Oh. Right for district.
okay, thanks.
Last paragraph.
So the other thing, I think for me, for that to be, that data point to be even, to be meaningful would be to have a better understanding of just passing, because the definition of passing is what, you have 8 classes, they have to pass 6. So you could fail 2, but you could still get Ds in your other classes. Is that I bet if we did a deeper dive into those numbers, we'd even be able to predict more of those students who need additional help. Because if you're getting 6 credits, but you're getting several Ds in core subjects, it's not a great trajectory to head into. You might be on track technically, but.
So, both, you brought up 2 things that sort of like where you want to go a little bit deeper and sort of explaining, sort of trying to find some more specific information about the data. And so what I want to do right now is, I apologize that my handwriting is a little bit serial killer, but we'll get this summarized for you, and then we'll also start to think about these data sources. And so this gives staff some time to think about, like, if we have any resources that we can provide for you in terms of like getting some of these answers. Some of them might be straightforward, some of them might just be adding greater contextualization. You all might be able to answer these as well, but these are just sort of things that we'll sort of keep on your radar in terms of questions. So the next thing I want to do, Joe, did you have a question? Joe?
I just wanted to say something for the board to understand. I know you're in the process of trying to surface the data you feel will help you set some goals. And with regards to 9th grade on track, that is actually one of the focuses that we have in our 4-year plan, is actually to try to bring supports to that. Whenever we're looking at 8th grade convergence on any high school, it's already a type of mayhem. And so we're trying to find a way to actually nuance that transition for them. And we have all kinds of designs that we're using out of Measure 98 money to support that work. We have freshman success teams that are now tracking those students in ways they've never been tracked before. Our freshman rates of attendance are far better than they were in 7th grade. And so that's a data point that we're excited about as well, but it won't surface in the data that you have here. And the data point that you have right now for the freshmen on track is before any of these initiatives have really rolled into place. So I just wanted to share, as you're looking at these things, that the high school has a 4-year plan of their own, and we're mid-year, we're halfway through it. And on Monday, actually, or on Tuesday, actually, we're going to be reworking it. But that's one of our foci as well.
So when you say nuance that, do you mean differentiating actual schedule and supports for
because
entry
we actually
ninth
send
graders?
people, we actually send people out to the schools to actually try to do a little bit more assistance in bringing students to the school in ways so that we can make them feel more comfortable about the transition. And one of the things that Paul was talking about in regards to students moving around, that happens real frequently early on when they think they're going to go to their neighborhood school and then they're suddenly uncomfortable. They want to go where their mom went to school. I mean, we have really high mobility. So anything we can do to reduce that mobility by making them comfortable about that is part of that design. Another one of the designs is actually to assign somebody to that kid, so that kid knows somebody at the school, and to do that as early on as we possibly can in the summer.
That's great context. Amy, did you have a question or a comment? Okay, we can go back to it. Okay, so hopefully this is starting to, so hopefully some potential goals are starting to percolate in your mind, right? So you've got some more context, more information. I want to go through one more exercise to start to get you thinking about some potential goal areas. So what you're going to do is in new, oh yes, Scott, did you have a question?
Before we.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew, God, I'm sorry.
Hold on.
You got 2 first names.
Yeah.
Stop bothering me one second. And I'm sorry I missed the beginning, so maybe you went over this. What's our goal going through the data as a level?
So I think what we're trying to do, so what we did last time was that we were trying to get you comfortable with the data, like what is there, right? Today, what we're trying to do is we're starting on this foundation of these accountability measures and trying to get you to start thinking about like, where has there been growth? So if you're gonna set a numeric goal where you're gonna have a baseline and then do that SMART goal where you're asking for growth, just to get a sense of like, well, what realistically has been growth or not growth at PPS so that you can start to calibrate as you start to think about your goals. So that's the thing. The second thing that we're gonna do is to start thinking about like, well, where are we seeing some positive gains, right? Like where is there some areas of positive deviance that you might be able to start thinking about like, how might this support a goal as well? So we're just continuing to familiarize yourself with the data that's there. The next time that we get together, we'll go a little bit deeper, and I'm gonna leave you with the vision. We have the awesome vision that has the graduate profile. And so right now we've been focused in on these like accountability measures, but if you remember from the last discussion, there's probably some other areas or different measures that you might want to incorporate into this. So we're just kind of still doing that.
So I think my question, I'm trying to think how to formulate it. I'm a little concerned that if 7 board members come up with the goals, they won't be as effective as if subject matter experts make recommendations to the board, which we will then want to ask questions about and perhaps modify. And so getting used to the data, which would be last time made sense to me, because like the robotics come to it without sort of knowing the data that's available and what's there. But I'm sort of wondering what the subject matter experts in the district think we should be measuring to be most effective. And are we flipping this process around in a not so productive way and having us sort of come up with goals that subject matter experts may say, you guys are way off?
So thank you for the question. So a couple things. So we're, the superintendent's leadership team in parallel is sort of going through these processes with you and are here and available for to be a resource. I think when we go through the goal setting, I think we're just trying to calibrate with the board, and we want to take your lead in terms of how much you want us to be a resource. So we want to be able to provide information. But if you recall from your conversations with AJ, I think what we've tried to establish is that the board is really here to help set the goals, and staff are here to help inform those goals. And then we're going to be accountable to those goals. So we can talk a little bit more about sort of like if you want some more presentation or input. But I think what we wanted to do through this process is sort of like have you in the data, have staff available, so that as you're coming up with goals, you have, for example, Joe, Craig, Louise, everyone here who can help contextualize the data. I suspect that once you set your draft goals on July 2nd, there's still going to have to be some recalibration, right? So SLT and all the departments at the school district will sort of look at those goals, and there will be some sort of, kind of iteration around that where we're sort of like, that's a really good goal, but based on, some of the work that Joe discussed around like 8th grade and 9th grade transition, maybe another measure could be this. So I think that we're imagining a real collaborative process.
But I think your point is well taken in terms of, is it the tail wagging the dog? Because we want to make sure that we know what the prioritized work streams are, so that we can see if they jive with our sense of what seems most urgent and what seems of highest value to the community.
Yeah, I mean,
so that we don't end up out of whack.
Because I think these are sort of the right questions. And rewinding the earlier conversation, you've seen sort of the landscape of the data that's available as a K-12 system. You see what the overall trends are. You see that there's some differences across student groups. You've already started to sort of say some of these things out loud. But given all that, what are the goal areas that matter to this board in Portland? Right? Is it literacy? Is it all the days that we spent developing a graduate portrait? There's something in there that you want to call out as something that's important. You know that there's these 9 accountability measures we're held accountable to. Nothing's changing. We're going to continue to be held accountable. But is there one you want to hone in that's more aggressive? Which one do you want to call out? And I think staff sort of, looking to see how you shape a few goal areas, and to, as AJ said, come back and say, well, here's some instruments for measuring that. Here's one suggested way we might track, our progress in that area, or here's some limitations of it, or here's a proxy for it, particularly when you start talking about progress monitoring. And then there might be some areas where it's not so easily tracked, and it would be a little bit leading edge to say, this one's really important to us. And we know that traditionally that isn't something that's tracked in school districts, but could we begin to brainstorm some ways to see that we're getting better at the things that we said would be educator and system shifts for our vision. So that's sort of the discussion that's, I know staff is anxious to hear the board kind of begin to dive into, so that we can come back with some suggestions about ways of measuring, trends that exist or not, and begin to land on some actual smart measures.
All right, thank you very
And
much.
it's just, I guess I think what I want to make sure, what I'm not hearing and what I want to make sure we make space for are staff saying, yeah, you're on the right track, or no, you're not. And I might be a little too caught up in this today, because a few hours ago, I presented the regional barometer to the Metro Board. We did not sit down with them and ask them to tell us how to measure livable communities, environment, transportation. We spent weeks working with subject matter experts within and outside of Metro to develop the draft measures that we then presented. And there was feedback that was useful and feedback that was not. And we had an opportunity when we got the unuseful feedback from the board to say, so we hear where you're going, but that measure of greenhouse gas is actually not an effective way of measuring it. So I haven't heard that yet, you guys are all talking about graduation rates, but that's actually not a measure of, a school success. Maybe it is, I'm saying it, that we talk about third grade literacy and graduation rates and making sure achievement, scores are equitable. And I guess I just want to make sure that there's some room to push back and say, here's the track that staff think you should be on.
So I think the way AJ described it is that this is goal setting, and then we'll ask, we say, here's what we're interested in from a goal standpoint. How would we measure that? Stats. And so we're not coming up, we're not designing the measurements, but how many set, where it is that we want our students to be. And I think a lot of the work's in here.
You mentioned livability as a goal, right? So how did livability become a goal that the barometer is used to measure?
Yeah, no, and that's
So I think
it's a
we're
great
saying
example.
that livability piece.
No, that's right, and the council said community livability, and then staff came up with, it just didn't feel like that's what we're doing. Like that's, I would actually be much more comfortable right now with the conversation about what do we want to see, student achievement go up, what does that look like, how do we measure that? And so that's, I just want to make sure that,
so that's kind of how we started. If you necessarily ask almost the exact same question, we're going through an exercise here, is to get us used to using data, not like these are the goals we picked for the measurements we picked. It was just an opportunity for us to, because I asked the same question, for us to work through the data and get familiar with it, but not necessarily we're going to be designing that specific measurement.
So what you'll traditionally find in LEAs or school districts under state accountability is states will have their accountability criteria. Districts will tend to identify some milestones. Generally, those are academic milestones, K through 6, 9. And they'll tend to set a growth target for particular student groups because we know they need acceleration to narrow the gap. So that's what you typically see in a balanced scorecard at a district level. But that's a more traditional approach. If the board, wants to think about another area that isn't typically looked at, what would that be? I know when we think about school improvement, we're less thinking about the immediate metric than we are, how do we gauge whether the capacity and conditions of the school are improving, because we believe that will beget better results. So that's what we want to be diagnosing and tracking and supporting, more so than how do we get points for those three, right?
Yeah. Are we looking at staff levels and who's moving and
those are strategies, I would say.
administrative retention rates or
So the
because
channel AJ, is that a student outcome, right?
Yeah.
So
But if it's related to student outcome, then it's something that we should measure. I mean, if there's
well, that we would have to evaluate our strategies and then whether they're having a return on investment, and getting at the goals that you are holding us accountable to, right? Because then we're beholden to coming up with strategies that are impactful or dispensing with ones that aren't.
right. So what I understand is these accountability measures, these are from the state, right? So we have to measure these.
We will be measured and held accountable by them regardless.
And then we can add other things to measure that we think are important that the district knows.
And interesting thing about them is like, for example, with attendance, it's not really, it's not a student outcome. So like, we could say, like, kids can't learn if they're not in school, so it's important to have higher attendance rate, but like, are we setting an attendance goal, or are we setting an achievement goal?
Yeah, right.
And one of the ways you support achieving
They're
that
not in
is like attendance.
So I think, for me, it's like, okay, so let's say we set that in 5 years, Black male students will be reading at, 30% instead of 19%, whatever the goal we set. And then it's up to the staff to say, okay, we're gonna work on attendance, we're gonna work on curriculum,
strategy,
we're gonna work
discipline.
on teacher retention, we're gonna work on administrative
Parent
leadership.
engagement.
And those are the strategies to reach that goal. And then our job is to say, like, the question AJ had to say is what's working, what's not, and how can we support you to get back on track, right? Like, those are the pieces, and maybe, music is on my heart, so maybe it'll be like, okay, is music a factor in helping kids read better, or how do those strategies play out? And that's the conversation, but at the end of the day, that's up to the staff.
As you hone in on a goal area, particularly if it's for a student group, if it's African American in a certain area, our strategies are gonna get tailored to that student group, right? We're gonna culturally responsive strategies and relevant material and diverse workforce, and we would be thinking about something that's gonna get at that goal area that you set for us, which would look different, a different goal.
And I think that's what goes to your question about, you're on that like staff side at Metro, so you're doing that work of what are the inputs, what are the pieces to reach that goal of livability that the board has set. And I think the tempting thing for me is to want to get into those inputs to say, we gotta work on, teacher retention or administrators of color, and that's not like taking that step back and keeping an eye on it, but not having that be our job is that fine line.
So I think another, go ahead.
I don't want to derail your
Oh, no, well,
presentation,
so
but
I
it
think
seems like
another-
we're organically sort of
Totally, so I think,
into, and I don't want to stifle the dialogue.
So I think the other challenge for the group, right, is sort of like how you all are going to coalesce around a specific set of goals. So part of the exercises are to sort of like get you familiar with the data, but also for you to like gauge kind of like what you're interested in. So the next thing that we were gonna do, and I think we still have some time to do it, is to sort of find either in these, and I think we can adjust this a little bit, find either in this data, the student success data, the discipline data, the MAP data, based on your interest areas, where are you seeing some positive deviance, or where are you seeing some success that might sort of prove ripe for some momentum for a goal? And so what I want to have you do is to sort of get into new partners and try to find, and I think this is kind of up to you. I was going to have you go by the indicators, but I think it's really just sort of like trying to find like where in whatever interests you. So for example, literacy. Where in literacy are you seeing sort of like places where there's either growth or places where there's like high achievement for different student groups, for different tiers, however you'd like to do that, that might sort of prove like a nice place for a baseline for a potential goal as we go into the next steps. It'll also, I think, give folks a chance in your partners to sort of see like, oh, Michelle's really into music, Andrew's really into math, and then to kind of sort of get a sense of kind of like where are your passions, where is your commitment, and to kind of negotiate that and to sort of think about like what are we starting to coalesce around, and we'll report out and be able to sort of get a sense going into July 2nd around like, okay, here's where we have some momentum, here's where we potential momentum, and here's where your interests are, and that can give us a sense of how to start winnowing down to some goals. Okay?
Danny, did you say that we're all gonna get the Portland Public Schools Reimagined document at the end of the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Jonathan already sent it to us, I think.
Yeah, so Jonathan sent
the-
you the hard
Yes.
copy. Would you guys like that now?
Yeah, because,
Yeah.
But we're only gonna look at the graduate portrait page, we're not gonna go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one
You're gonna wanna quickly.
The one thing to think about is that
You can do that right after the meeting.
because it's a document, you're gonna want to
Don't give it to us till
you're
afterwards.
gonna want to. Okay,
Yeah,
why don't we
let's
wait
let
till
us
afterwards?
wait.
Okay, we'll wait till afterwards.
I'll be jealous.
I don't know how Julia got it, but she's magical.
I have no
so maybe
idea.
you want to be partners with Julia. try to, if you don't mind, the three of you trying to don't pair up with each other, so that way you can, yeah, sorry, that's the.
We can't be together.
We can't be together yet, but you will.
misbehave when there's more than one of you.
True.
Okay, so we'll do this, and then I think we can report out. Your goal here is to find an area that you're interested in, a measure where you're seeing some positive deviance, where you're seeing some like momentum that could potentially, be a place where we might start with a goal that's achievable.
Then we're gonna
Okay.
share that out.
And then we're going to share it out.
So then we'll start to hear.
And then the SLT members are still here and can help contextualize that. So you might want to, if you're really interested in sort of like 9th grade on track or 8th grade, you might sort of say like, hey Joe, what do you got for me? Or math with Sarah, or curriculum with Louise, or between Keely and Craig, like they know everything about all the schools. So there's a wealth of information, and so I think everyone's going to be defer to you, but people will give their opinion.
So we have
They're
to
not shy.
discuss the subject that we're interested in that group.
Yeah, and try to find some
Try to
positive
find an
deviance in that.
Okay.
Okay. So go ahead and get into partners, and
We need our
we'll give you a little
booklets.
bit less time, and then feel free to spread out around.
Can I work over here? Yeah. I want to play with your book.
You coming over here?
I have
3 minutes. Plus, I don't have my binder.
I have.
You do, okay.
So we're looking for
The
projects.
thing is positive, so positive.
Does everyone have a partner?
Positive.
Easiest way to.
No.
Thanks for this is helpful. No, it was helpful. No, it's so helpful.
Looking for positive.
We said that last time.
So that means it's off the norm, but in a positive way.
Impossible, yeah. So
Right.
we're trying
We've got a
to
school, right, we've got a school where.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I.
The deviance means the deviance.
Well, I think like, for example, take,
I thought it was. Maybe I'm.
So that would be.
well, I think it's deviates from others, like,
Okay.
all these schools in South there about to, I think do very well.
I think that's right. So. What's interesting right here is there's the dip in that second year. There's a that's a nice. Yeah. Easy to another one.
Yeah.
Lee and Lewis.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's not the real.
Well, that's flat line, but it's a dip in the bottom.
Now it's only about.
You know, they're just all. Except for those two.
We're failing, like, if that many kids are happening, we're failing now.
That's
out.
Well, is the test in the second year? Test.
parasitic students are decided like their social and emotional problems. So in order to make some of those
But then now you start to see in the last couple of years, like being one line below it, what they call it.
that's eighth grade. That's like geometry.
Others are applied in terms of practical problems, but some are actually hands-on learning. So do we want to,
I don't know where some of these schools are,
just
what water right?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering like how are we? They're kind of all over.
Yeah, I've been to that
They're all in Southeast.
This is the state, this is us, yeah. Right,
But the question is where those are.
right, yeah, right, and yeah. Yeah. These are all of us there. We're looking for policies So that, I think you're right that it was, so we're looking for everything's right, higher FCS, which we've identified based on those curves.
Okay, so maybe just
But, you know, I mean, maybe that's you.
And so.
Or not to increase. So is this overall, there's an increase. So where would the positive deviance be there? All on one page.
what it would be to get one of
That small binder, they don't have. You know, one thing that's interesting too is, so there's a participant, I don't know where to find it here, but you can see a correlation between teacher turnover and some achievement. Yeah, that gives you, there aren't that many lines that just go up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said Dan right as you said Danny, sorry.
Yes, we're wondering like what's the deliverable we're looking to?
You're just finding a place where, like, based on kind of what you're interested in, where there might be some positive deviance. So I'm trying to find like, where's there some momentum, right?
Yeah.
So
That might be right for. I think it's depending on sort of how you guys would want to do it. Like, you can sort of be rigorous and say like, we're going to only, stay with the trend. Or you may say like, I'm curious about this outlier. I think it could be either.
Okay.
Leaving.
Maybe there's some systemic strategies there. And I think sometimes, yeah, maybe that's just.
Doesn't start it so low.
So it's so low, it's like all white. Woodlawn.
That was like area of focus.
28 to 39. And what is that? 20 to 30. So 10 points is a lot. But starts even their thoughts. Right. And what schools is right? So it brought it up to the level of Jefferson, which I was interested in, and where they're charter. Very white. I think it's just gets us to
Yes, totally have a good
Yeah, because they have,
I had said together.
for the 5E for all.
Great.
They had the biggest stretch.
oh wow.
So I think
Every This is a 13-point game here. But it's interesting because something happened in that year too. In all of the cases, year two, it went down, but it didn't.
She was more my sister's Hold on, it's killing it, right?
5 year, but where's the kid in 4 year? On time.
Yeah, I'm like,
If I went
It's two geographic.
you know, what do you mean by that?
When are we doing that? I was wondering. When are we doing that?
So is that attributed
I don't do
to
super high level
Ivy
No. But so you know what?
They
We're
started
like,
that was
prior. I was gonna say,
we're
but then they were gonna do, are we doing IB math though? As well?
So with science, as we all high school science, we partnered with them to fit with, so the new high school sequence, they've been able to stick with the pattern science and infuse the IB into it, and so yes, it is, so the patterns physics course, the freshman physics does kind of some included IB. Chemistry, it has the IB standards fully integrated and we piloted biology to make sure that they do it, and so next year biology will also be IB for all.
Down.
For mathematics,
But we might not have those.
I'm honestly not sure about mathematics.
We'll see some charts, so one's on
And then what does the school need to do to get, I mean, so if what we're hearing is statistics, like the math scores are really low, like,
It's fairly diverse.
what does it take for a school to become IB for all in math? I mean, does everybody have like their?
You have the IB program in the school.
It's both, right? So native.
The IB is a specific
It's still totally.
It's based internationally, so.
Okay.
Yeah, a work colleague who's coming totally from Brazil here.
Yeah. But the DLI into North Carolina, North Carolina, what happened?
Because it'll be
It's the same curriculum across globally, which is incredible.
they get globally, like the tests are all the same and they get graded
And it's
internationally.
wow.
How about with
That's like if you go to an American school in any other country, right? It's sort of the competencies are globally
Literally the
similar.
American.
Yeah, literally the American school. Yeah.
Okay.
She's taking, or sometimes it's called international school.
Based on their line inherent bias or something.
But I think
the
Yeah, she was my sister's age, but brought a miles.
So is the highest level is 5? Well, I have to ask you, but I think we don't have.
No, I did too. It's like, okay, just put the key on.
There's no legend. But maybe there's one.
I'm 6 and 1, half a dozen of the other on Gantt charts.
If we dug in.
This is the number of students.
And so I do think that there's some value all students adjusted denominator.
There's about 289 students.
Oh, that's interesting.
35% Latino.
Does it say what it is at the top?
What's the numerator?
Is it because of declining enrollment?
It's like over
So single strand, so one grade number.
on the community side.
Oh,
That's kind of gentrification syndrome. It's like red diabetes. And then math. Sorry. That's my buddy's class. That's Jamie's class.
I personally. That achievement doesn't look good, oh, that's just good for all students, is that what that's saying?
And also because the numbers are controlled by law. It's not, nothing's left to chance.
Let's just see those, how those two go. Okay, so this level 2 of an abstract is actually somewhere there is, it says, it's like level 1.
So they're like those
I thought I saw that last time.
It just means the same thing as level 1.
They had asterisk next to them.
Oh, just because they're so,
This student is not in the lowest 10% of schools. So it's,
Congratulations,
you're the lowest level, you're really a 1.
but you're not the lowest 10%.
Yeah. So they're grading on a curve, kind of, they're curving it rather than
So for
doing absolute numbers.
It's all over the place.
Well, that's, how are they comparing apples to apples then, though? The manuscript, and how are they determining Yeah. Why would you want to know that you're not really a level 2, you're actually a level 1, but you're not the lowest in the state? Just don't know how that's useful.
So ergo, all of the level 1s are the lowest 10%. Is that what you extrapolate to? Yes. You're a 1, but you're not the lowest 10%.
Yes. So a level 1, the level 1
These are indicates the lowest 10%.
and then
which is, it's almost like, are they protecting? And then it's being talked about that one.
I'll show you a picture.
I'm just wondering if certain schools are getting level 2 for some reason, because it looks better.
so on over here. I'd like to see the address sheet we're gonna talk about.
So, I mean, it sounds like this, 2 without an asterisk is enough.
Yes, that's what it sounds like to me. Yes.
But
What's the advantage of having a 2 with an asterisk?
I know, that's what I like to understand. Why wouldn't they do like 1A?
Yeah. But again, you can't compare it to. Okay.
And it makes sense.
Okay.
But maybe some like or
That's what I was
or
wondering.
attached to.
That's what I was wondering. Yes.
Well, that's in your
So maybe that's the
I know, but I mean, early days, you probably remember the whole school.
an intervention. The number of free reduced by that. Okay. So which is the crux.
Look at how good they're doing. Just get a D in that phrase.
That's exactly right. Yes. It's going good, it's going well, I should say.
I don't know what we're doing the same, but.
And things that we are additionally then curious about.
Okay, so here's.
So which two schools you eventually?
So now, well, that was,
And it was just,
High
it
School.
wasn't on.
But interesting, okay, Lincoln, which is you have
Now that.
achievement in.
So look from the table.
Yeah, they're like achieving
I think some of them.
math and English, and then they're also graduating. So like.
Because there's no longer any attachment.
And they were,
Although I didn't know this.
I know, well, because we were just getting, what is it? Kind of
I went to LC. Oh yeah, my son too.
We were really trying hard to figure out
to do
how
it.
to build that system. And like, nobody can really unless you make it.
So to me, this is like, it's
So.
Yeah, and so then it was.
I'm on optimistic talks about the real world experience.
Still not really here.
So I would say.
Or pretty low levels.
sorry, you're getting kids through though.
And I don't know, maybe there's more to that.
But it could be like a, yeah. So.
And does it say what it corresponds to? Does it?
Well, I think it does have a,
Those are cuts.
So then you can pay some number for
Did you do that?
Oh, because then it's a school instead of a program.
yes, okay. Those are the,
Right.
the bounds or
Well, I looked at because Strata.
That doesn't sound.
it doesn't sound right either. The tiers, yeah, but that's, so level 4, that makes sense to me. 86 to 92.
So.
How do you make it a school?
And then, you know, also 18 months about their viability and their justification.
Tomorrow, there's
Have you been to the registration?
Well,
that's pretty good. If you go out through the cafeteria area, then you'll see the ATM.
Yes.
Yes.
So funny, there's an ATM.
But there's like,
The cafeteria only, the cafeteria only.
Oh, I think
Because we're the.
oh my god, people come from other countries and they're like, what do you mean there's no Wi-Fi in this street? We're just like,
yeah, right. Those are like,
I'm curious, a resource.
So. Goal that I would.
on the other hand, I just think
Not just think that D's mastery.
right, well, and I think that's what, I mean, I don't know what the
So how? Or.
But as a time,
That then
36 hours a year.
one is just a neighborhood population.
That's the reason.
We should split.
not the next question, as they impact their construction.
Maybe it's really complicated to do it now.
Sandy.
Like
you just process or?
So in non-smart lingo, essentially.
Like, see, even though this is 36, it's not right.
No, no, the families that over there.
Look at that also, so like the top class. Well, so
There's,
there's.
you could like, you're doing one thing.
With a D or higher, or am I simplifying what you're saying? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand.
I think like so I forget like how.
Part of what, I mean, the main one is driving
But in terms so there are graduation requirements, so that would be a way to, so 4 years now, fresh start, 3 years now, 3 years science.
have several,
We have 2
4-year programs.
to left to.
Oh, okay, I finally found it.
There's a building,
Oh, that's
and
And social studies is also 3 years. And then 2
really just got clusters.
That's just 2 semesters of PE and 2 semesters of health. So graduation requirements would be a way to say it.
What is, yeah, I mean.
I'm ready, oh, here, college readiness.
And
Or like
I changed a lot of
Yes,
Because to me, like you have all these kids who are ones and twos on their basic classes, and yet they're graduating. So like, pat ourselves on the back, they graduated that way or not, math or.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's showing up, and actually,
Yeah, that is student-centered, but it is hard to define given the current data. Would it be appropriate to have a goal with essentially a conceptual or wanting to find a better way to define it? Like she wants college and career ready kids, but she does not like how ninth grade on target is defined and how our like, you know, we've got kids at 1s and 2s that are graduating, and so they clearly are college and career. So, like, coming up with a metric that absolutely focuses more on success.
this exact relationship.
Math and English, like everybody's at 1s and 2s, and yeah, they're all graduating, right, but they.
That's what I'm saying.
So I think that's the thing, is that like once you start set up your goals, right, then you can go back, and so we
Yeah,
have
this is a picture right into you guys.
we have the data that we have, and then we'll have the data that we want to start to collect. And then
Here they are. Right, Google where.
so service portion, what's it called, services.
System planning and performance.
System planning and proportion.
Okay. The forecasters and
Jeff was like.
They get to start on these goals and then start to think about like how to
what they,
like collect it moving forward. So essentially the goal is to design the data collection.
we're gonna help them design the new binders. That has useful.
Yeah, I mean, we'll still have these binders because that's what we're accountable to, but like, I think there's lots of room to do that.
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, I think, not to belabor the point, but part of it is just like, the more you know what the limitations of this are, the more you can figure out, like, oh,
That's what this is pointing out. Every time we sit down with this, it's like, my God, the labels are off. My 9 months are, it's like comparing the census to the American Community Survey.
right,
Just in the time that.
and you have like, you have the Department of Education.
Rarely do. It's history.
Yes.
grandfathered, you're not supposed to use that, race.
Well, I'm thinking like
There's
the
a lot of
building.
players
What if I take this quarter
bureaucracy.
Legacy.
Maybe like
Yes.
2 more minutes and then we'll kind of report out.
Okay, so we should, is the goal going to be,
Pressure's on.
is the goal going to be move something?
We're trying to move away from these.
A test of proficiency in certain
No, we're gonna
areas.
use grandfather.
Well, that would be the measure.
Make it on the
Something like all students proficient or
All sides are organic, 5, 10, 15 years old. And so like there's some urgent
proficiency to actually study address.
Great, okay.
Like,
But brought a mile.
Yes, so I think that just, like,
I think that's exactly how AJ would have said it.
like graduating
Is that right?
with no more than 20% level 1, like that gets at that idea that you were talking about, that like, I don't want them graduating with all level 1s.
Yeah,
Like, so that would be
yes.
a way to, that's so that keeps it student centered and leads into our current metrics.
How did you say that?
Yeah.
And they're also so engaged.
All right, let's go ahead and come back together, let's report out, and then we'll let the board do the rest of it.
Oh, I see.
Proficiency.
These are,
From a baseline.
X to Y.
How about from 2019, 2018,
Let's share what you talked about. It sounded like you guys had really good
baseline,
Exciting
or whatever
conversation.
this column is.
no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm like, well, you're really good.
Is it, you want to raise it by a percentage point, or you want to raise it?
Well, like increasing efficiency as measured by.
So,
Can I copy?
historically, students will go from the baseline in this year to a 25% increase for 2025, or whatever that will be.
So what?
So there's like a number of
no.
okay. Well, increasing efficiency as measured by blank from X to Y.
Or paradigm.
I'll try to raise when you see all right.
Listen to the song.
That's
I
excellent, yeah.
don't think this sentence is right.
It is, it's a little bit toothy, but the idea is
We'll kind of come
that
back
there's
together,
a
do a
measurable,
report out,
it's got a number in it.
and then we'll talk about
That
next
identifies a
steps.
population. It's got our deadline, it's got a baseline and then out 3 years.
Yeah.
It's got,
Anybody listening to you?
I think, it's got, you can wordsmith it, but I think that's a good goal.
We're gonna call
It's a
you
smart goal.
Bailey.
Actually took over
But my only question is, do we wanna say that all students, historically
So I'm
underserved, all
actually-
students, we wanna see growth, right? Increase all students, or
Wait,
Or I
all
would put 6
students
months after.
meet,
Well,
do we wanna measure
Well,
growth,
have a
or
joke.
were there? Joe did it.
okay, all set? Let's start. Okay, so let's go ahead and do report out, and then we'll sort of go all capture things. It sounded like you had some really good conversations. Who wants to go first? Should we make the new Amy and Michelle and Andrew? Do you want to go first?
Michelle was with us.
Oh, sorry.
Happy
We
to
were
go
just,
first, sure.
Oh, it was just the two of you. Sorry.
I moved.
Sure.
Okay, so what did you guys talk
So
about?
we wanted to focus on sort of third grade proficiency. And actually I have a data question that I probably should have picked up last week. Maybe I was paying attention. The SBAC scores for elementary schools, is that only given in third grade or is that given?
Starts at third grade.
So it's given every year starting in third grade?
It's just
So when I
third
see
grade.
this,
that-
this summary, percentage of students scoring 3+ on the Smart Balance, is that percentage of students at every grade? Was it third grade? Is it, anyone know?
So I'm sorry, I missed the.
This summary of
Elementary
students
school.
scoring three plus
Uh-huh.
SBAC.
It's
Is
the
that
whole schmear of third, fourth, and fifth grade as far as I know.
Okay, so it would be three, okay, so this is not really getting specifically third grade achievement, but close enough. What we tried to look for were schools that were doing well on a 3-year trend in both math and English in ELA. And so the ones that sort of jumped out are Deach, Lewis, Stevenson, Woodlawn. And then we had some discussion about the different demographics of those schools.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, Stevenson's a pretty white, wealthier school. Woodlawn, not as much. Beach, I think, is changing. I think that's what we're being told.
But we also had the benefit of having Keely and Joe as part of our conversation who could bring insights that we wouldn't otherwise have, which is, you know, Woodlawn came out of a school improvement grant and they've been able to sustain the structures that they put in place with those added resources, even now that the resources have been gone for a couple of years, and they just have really strong instructional practices. And same with Stevenson, like just really tight instructional practices. So the unfortunate thing is that in the absence of, you know, strong and strategic support from the central office, the places where you might see sustained growth are places that were able to do it on their own because they had maybe really strong leadership, maybe consistent teacher core. But it seems to be the exception and not the norm.
Right. All right. One more interesting thing is that Stevenson had growth starting from a high level, and Woodlawn had growth starting from a pretty low level, and then Beach sort of had growth starting right around in the middle. They both had, I mean, all three of those schools had pretty large growth, but it's interesting to me, like, which of those is harder to do?
Well, and also not just the harder, but a lot of times in schools where you do start from that higher rate of achievement, you'll see a sense of complacency that like, these kids are fine, as opposed to like, we still need to move these kids the same trajectory as our expectations for any other kids.
And it'd be interesting to go deeper, which we didn't because we got into some other fascinating conversations, but is the growth, where is the growth coming, right? Is it coming from, you know, underserved students who started at lower, you know, are we closing the achievement gap in those schools? Or are we just, or are we not?
Or are we just gentrifying?
Well, I was, you know,
Well,
every
beach,
conversation
that's-
that we've had about here, especially particularly in the schools in the Northeast, we are seeing, you know, higher income, wider population move in, and historic, you know, Black residents in particular are being moved out to far east, you know, east of 82nd, east of 92nd. And in fact, you can see that's where the city and the county are concentrating their services more. The Sun schools are all moving kind of east. I know there's some in Portland Public, but
Health clinics.
health clinics.
But Beach is
and other-
almost 50% Latino.
Right, but it's
But
also
that's,
DLI
that's
and it's
because
totally
they have the,
different
it's the
demographic
language
in DLI
program,
programs.
not because
Spanish, yeah.
not because of the, not because that's the neighborhood.
Both, a little bit of both, but yeah, that's why it's so heavy. Yeah, but the DLI program is a lot bigger than the community program.
Yeah.
So third grade
Twice.
ELA and math.
Okay, so any other questions for this group or anything else to report out? Okay,
I have a question of
Scott
the
and then Amy.
educators, when you see a school that has sustained growth in both areas, are you gonna question whether that's coincidental, or are you gonna assume that there are some structures in place that are facilitating that?
Well, hopefully we're not assuming anything. They have that, their strategies outlined in their school improvement plan. Our supervisors are at the school on a regular basis, conferencing with school leaders, and hopefully the improvement, the change objectives being implemented are the ones that we're talking about and sharing with others who have a similar profile school or population. So we start cataloging, we start doing instructional rounds through schools that are demonstrating accelerated growth, et cetera. There's a few things that we would do to start sort of propagating
some of those practices.
Scott, did you have a question?
So I think this discussion, I think got touched on the difference between having a metric that's if you get over the bar, you're okay, versus is that child getting what they need and are capable of? And just having a metric doesn't cut the mustard. And if you go back to the 2000 strategic plan, it was the mission or vision or whatever was around very much every child at their potential kind of a statement, which is a lot different than passing a test.
Good to note. All right, who wants to go next?
We could go.
Okay.
So we dispersed. We got really hung up on the whole positive deviance.
Yeah.
I love it. Tell us more.
No, well, it was just like the concept of it.
That being positive is deviant in this system.
Just what does it mean exactly? Is that, are we looking at a positive trend? Are we looking at for a deviation in data?
It's up to you to define.
But I mean,
well, that's what we figured.
Where are the
No,
outliers that are showing?
I mean, but it's like not if you can't understand the words, it's not very meaningful. So
If we're seeing flat across the district, which is kind of what the district totals seem to be, but we're finding a couple of schools that are
Exceeding.
trending up,
So that's what we ended up on.
then I think that's.
So we,
That's a positive.
it was a
deviance
graphic
from the
chart
norm.
that we sort of built our goal around. But if you look at, this is Grant. And you can see all the level 4s and 5s, the blues and greens, so that's all on track to graduate, and then graduation, it's like, great, Grant's really doing well with that. But then you look over here and it's all on math and English, and it's all like level 1s and 2s. And it's like, okay, they're killing it on getting kids to graduate, but they're not mastering math or English. And the interesting thing is, if you look at almost all the high schools, that's the same, not to pick on Wilson, sorry. But, so Wilson has, I mean, they have a few more, actually, they have more, it's hard to believe, but this is Wilson, it's almost all level 1s on math and English. This is just a bad thing that just happened.
All the data.
You'll never recover.
This is level 1.
Anybody can join me in
They'll
like
be
how
out of
dramatic
September.
that was. I'll find a good movie and we put the book together. Okay, so this is Lincoln, and I think this is what most of us would think what we would want, which is kids are graduating on time, they're on track freshman year, and they're in a 4-year cohort graduating, but they're also, in most cases, getting students to level 3 and 4 in English and math.
Who are the yellows? What groups?
It's Black African Americans, and on math, Latino, but on English, the Latino subgroup is at 4. So.
Because they've been in DLI.
So we try to think of like what a goal would look. This is what we're supposed to be doing. What the goal would look like.
So Lincoln was your kind of like outlier or positive
Right,
outlier.
and but we.
Cleveland was up there too.
Oh yeah, Cleveland was not quite as.
Not not as robust.
But they have IB.
Because of
Yeah. So we were interested in a little more data on Cleveland because with IB for All, like how that's impacted students. So Cleveland's is it's not as good as Lincoln, but it's also, they have a more diverse student body, but it's definitely better than most of the others. But math, they're all level, I mean, shocking, they're all level 1.
Except for students with disabilities.
except for, that's a level 2. Okay, what is the deal with the level 2 with the asterisk, which is really level 1, except for they're not in the lowest 10%?
We thought that was funny.
Yeah.
Not funny,
I
haha,
mean,
but funny, strange.
So,
You know, but there's something just came up about the Latino students and the impact of this, you know, DLI, dual language. You know, Latinos speak English, right? I mean, some people have been here 5 generations, 20 generations, so.
Yeah, but.
Well,
you
there
know,
aren't
the-
necessarily
but-
more,
So that,
of the Latinos in DLI, there's more native Spanish speakers, because there's a bump.
I guess if we're lumping everybody together, we're not
It's hard
taking
to-
into effect that some people are newer English speakers, but most of the people I imagine in Portland Public are English speakers for many generations.
I think one of the
Or
measures
how we
could be
can-
our migrant, right, like the
In
migrant
the
reading level is
migrant,
at
that's the
16%.
different, yes, it's a
Right,
different
so
population.
That's a different population in some cases, right?
In some cases.
And some cases not.
There's a
But
preference
even-
in the lottery in DLI for native Spanish speakers, not just
I see.
Latino.
Okay.
But even country of birth, so for example, the lowest achieving English learner
Mm-hmm.
nationally are US born. So while you're saying, you know,
Interesting.
many of them
Okay.
are generationally here,
Yeah.
yes, but many are still qualified or classified as an English learner, and they have the lowest academic achievement of all the EL groups.
So given these observations, what then was the takeaway as a potential goal area?
Historically underserved students will have growth in proficiency as measured by blank, to be filled in by the experts, from X to Y, from 2019-20 to 23 in core classes.
So good model.
And we need somebody who's an English major to sentence structure it in the right
So good use of the sentence frame, but it sounds like what you're calling out is historically underserved.
historically underserved and really focusing on those core classes. So it's not good enough just to graduate, but to try and focusing on those historically underserved students and getting them mastering their core classes. We were going back to this larger sort of like college readiness concept, because just because you graduate from high school doesn't mean you're college ready, but mastery or a certain level of proficiency in core classes probably would mean you're more likely to be college ready.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so we got some positive outliers and even some extra credit going into some potential goal using the SMART goal format. All right, no pressure, but next, who wants to go next? Or unless there's any other questions for this group. Who wants to go next?
We can go next.
Okay.
I was with Scott and Guadalupe, and we started with 3rd grade reading, and then we talked about how to measure mastery in math, and then we ended up with empathetic leadership as our goal.
Okay, tell me.
I can't wait to see how you get there.
Because we kind of thought that maybe other people would cover reading and math, so we focused on empathetic leadership. We were looking at the graduate profiles that are in the vision, and capturing that of the 9 profiles, 1 is about core knowledge. And so that's vitally important, that academic proficiency, and yet our community is saying to us that it's not only what students know when they leave the schools that we value, but it's who they are, the kind of people. And so we talked about how do we measure empathetic leadership and what does that look like? And Scott shared about a video from Vestal that kind of highlights one of those positive deviances around what empathetic leadership looks like. Do you want to share what that video is like?
Yeah, the theme of that school is social justice. And so they did I guess it was their 5th grade student capstone thing. It's an incredibly diverse school, a lot of poverty, and they looked at classmates who, didn't get a shower, maybe didn't spell good, and so they have put together, they had some room that they repurposed with a shower and with shelves with clothes, clean clothes, deodorant, soap. If you need to, everybody wants to feel good when they're in school, and you don't feel good if you're not clean and looking good. And the kids talking about it was really impressive. So if we're talking about a demonstration project, which I think where we need to go with empathic leadership, those kids had it.
And one of the, you were saying they're currently raising money for a washer dryer.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best things that Scott highlighted from the video is one of the students said, we know that our classmates may not use these because there's a stigma with use, and that's okay, but we wanted them available. And so that to me is that empathetic leadership, because so often if we see a need and we create an opportunity to meet that need, if people then don't take advantage of that opportunity, there's judgment and bias. But I think that empathetic leadership is captured in that ability to say, if they don't use it, it's okay. We understand why someone might not want to use it, but we wanted to do this anyway.
That's
So the best of fifth graders is sort of a vignette of a positive outlier, which led to, and this is sort of a preview of next level vision work. If you could imagine the graduate portrait to bring stakeholders together to actually define an exemplary level of those skills and dispositions demonstrated by students could look like. And you actually educated students on the front end to it, and say at the end of their fifth grade elementary experience, could share their journey towards any one of these attribute areas, or all of them for that matter, in front of a sort of a panel of peers and community and parents. And there was a clear way to sort of quantify that. Imagine uploading thousands of students' graduate portrait progress, so that by 12th grade they're actually exemplifying all of them.
But also to have those kind of resources available for, teachers and building leaders as they're making climate plans. Like, check out this best practice over here.
You can pick whatever form you want to take, but what we're looking for is that skill or disposition being demonstrated, and that's what they would have to sort of make the case for.
So we didn't write the sentence goal as Julia's team demonstrated, because it's this, we don't quite have that measure or what it would look like worked out, but it was just that finding that, as we talked about what the values of our community have been expressed in that vision, empathetic leadership is a huge one, and Scott had that great example.
80% of fifth graders will demonstrate to an intermediate level the graduate portrait rubric along the trait of empathetic leadership. You could start to imagine
what that
how
could
you
look like.
plan to look at that. An instrument for it.
That's great. Cool. All right, any other questions about this group? Okay, last group. I'm gonna write it along the bottom.
Not very exciting. Oh, we're still on the literacy stuff.
That's cool. What do you got?
We got off in a lot of really good conversations. And then we looked at Laurel first too. It was also a first year, just trying to make some comparisons of the balanced literacy cohort, and they're killing it with everybody. So, concluding that poverty is a better predictor than race and class.
Well, it was,
Seems like
it was a question. So nationally, socioeconomic class is the best predictor of student achievements. It flipped about 10 years ago. It used to be race, ethnicity. It's now class. But at least for a long time, PPS was an outlier because race and ethnicity continued to be the best predictor of student achievement, far beyond class. And the question is that still the case? I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of looking like it might be now switching to that class might be the better predictor. When I'm looking across the schools that we looked at the scores more carefully on.
Does Laurelhurst have a number of free and reduced?
9%.
9%?
As opposed to 95%.
More than 95%, and many of the
Sydney,
other schools, yeah.
The other ones we looked at.
Yeah.
Also on that question of class, then you get into the question of mobility hugely.
Any other, so Laurelhurst was your outlier, any other?
Well, I mean, they're not really an outlier. If you look at their 9% free and reduced, they're kind of on target of what you think would be happening there. But
the comparator.
Good work. It's a good initial sort of imagination of areas that have value to the board that they want to see our system doing well against. So we'll synthesize the notes, and I think we'll pick up on this on July 2nd. We'll give it some more thinking as well. Try to kind of describe these in some concrete ways for you all to think about. Thanks for the extra time and getting more literate about sort of knowing where to look for those things, which will continue to get annually updated by OG and our own departments. So I think we're going to pause here for tonight on this work, but I think we're getting closer, and I really enjoyed the conversations this evening. Thank you, staff, for being a part of that. And you're all dismissed for the evening.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah.
What's our schedule for the ride? Wasn't there another goal setting session? I just want to make sure I've got it on my calendar.
July 2nd, so we'll
That's
do
the
another
next
work
one.
session after the board's business earlier. And this is where we'll sort of like bring back the vision document, and then also start getting into taking some of these goals, but also developing some other draft goals.
Okay, nothing else between now and then. And anything else between now and then that we need to be board members at?
That we have? Pass the budget.
So, I have got the dates mixed up, so I actually wrote
This
my
is
mic
big
just-
slog coming through the pipeline.
So Chair, just one last thing, can I? So we don't have champagne and balloons this evening. We want to make sure that you have the information for your consideration, and we'll certainly share more next Tuesday, and I know the community will want to hear from all of you, but we're reaching an exciting milestone and a really big deliverable with the mock-up here that I want to hand to you. I think it represents an incredible effort on behalf of our community stakeholders. And I think we'll outline some of that in a resolution for your official adoption. But I think at last count, we're at like 16,000 Post-its. We're at dozens and dozens of gatherings and stakeholder focus groups.
Actually, scores.
And
Scores of meetings.
Scores of meetings. And so I hope that you're pleased in the way that the community's themes and ideas and concepts are represented here. Hopefully, I think you will recognize phrases that emerged from a lot of dialogue and group talk and Play-Doh and pipe cleaners, whatever we're doing are in here. And already we're thinking ahead with the graduate portrait, and you'll see it sort of illustrated there. I think some of the unique features here are the fact that unlike other district visions, we actually went a couple layers deeper into the educator essentials and the system shifts. And so I hope, I know you'll give it a careful read, and we'll have a bigger discussion about it next Tuesday, but we wanted to make sure you had advanced copies before we start printing these up. So thank you for your leadership in getting this to this point.
Really nice achievement.
Yeah, thank you, this is really, really great. So many pictures, so different from the binders. Well, a few pictures, right? The pictures worth 1,000 words illustrated right here.
Where's the test tube meat product?
All right, well,
And please bring it with you on Tuesday.
Bring it with
The
you on
only copy
Tuesday.
you will get, so,
Bring this,
What do you mean?
for now.
What's happening Tuesday?
We have a voting
For our
on
board
it,
meeting.
so it's not gonna go,
we can't send it to the printer without your vote.
so it's not gonna be in your packets for the next meeting, so you're doing it now.
Oh, I might have some changes.
We're done with wordsmithing. But thank you. I think it's a collective product, so thank you, everybody.
it's really great.
Okay, so work session adjourned.